Unsolved true crime, a topic that people are infatuated with countless Netflix documentaries, YouTube video essays, and TV shows that cover this topic extensively. So guess what? We are diving deep into the ultimate true crime iceberg. This video will be very long with so many interesting and obscure topics I'm sure you've never heard of, so you'll want to stick around. And this iceberg has topics ranging from the Zodiac Killer at the top to some insane and just weird topics I've never heard of before at the bottom. So this is some interesting stuff. And actually, before we get into this video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. These videos take a very long time to make and produce, so subscribing to the channel helps a lot. And it's the channel's goal to be at 500,000 subscribers, so please subscribe to the channel. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into Tier 1. The Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is one of America's most infamous unidentified criminals. Active in Northern California during the late 1960s and 1970s, the Zodiac is linked to at least 5 confirmed murders, though he claimed responsibility for 37 in taunting letters sent to newspapers. These letters often included cryptograms, with one remaining unsolved to this day. His victims were usually young couples in secluded areas, though his motive seemed more rooted in notoriety than any clear pattern. Despite extensive investigations, including hundreds of suspects, his identity remains unknown. Theories range from lone killers to more elaborate conspiracies. The Zodiac's ability to evade capture, combined with his chilling correspondence, has left a legacy of fear and fascination, ensuring his place in the annals of true crime and unsolved mysteries. D.B. Cooper. D.B. Cooper is the alias of an unidentified man who hijacked a Northwest Orient Airlines flight on November 24, 1971. He boarded the plane in Portland, Oregon, bound for Seattle, Washington, and calmly informed a flight attendant he had a bomb. After receiving $200,000 in cash and parachutes as ransom, Cooper released the passengers in Seattle but kept the crew. He then ordered the plane to fly towards Mexico City at a low altitude. Somewhere over the dense forest of Washington, he jumped from the plane with the money and was never seen again. Despite extensive investigations and searches, no trace of Cooper or most of the ransom money has ever been found, except for a small amount discovered in 1980. The case remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in aviation history. Elizabeth Short / Black Dahlia. Elizabeth Short, famously dubbed the Black Dahlia, was a 22-year-old aspiring actress whose gruesome murder remains one of Los Angeles' most infamous cold cases. On January 15, 1947, her body was discovered in a vacant lot, severed in two with surgical precision. Her face had been mutilated, and there was no blood at the scene, suggesting she was killed elsewhere. Short was last seen alive days earlier, and her murder captivated the media, who sensationalized her life and death. Theories and suspects have abounded, including doctors, crime writers, and even her acquaintances, but no one has been charged. The case is notable for its brutality, media frenzy, and lack of resolution, leaving it as one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries and a grim symbol of Hollywood's darker side. New Orleans Axeman. The New Orleans Axeman was an unidentified serial killer who terrorized the city from 1918 to 1919. The Axeman targeted Italian-American grocers and their families, breaking into their homes at night and attacking them with an axe, often one found at the scene. His violent spree left at least 6 people dead and many others injured. Strangely, robbery was not a motive, as nothing of value was taken. The case took an eerie turn in 1919 when the Axeman sent a letter to the local newspaper, claiming to be a demon and threatening more killings unless jazz music was played in homes across the city. That night, the streets were filled with jazz, and no murders occurred. Despite numerous suspects, the Axeman was never caught, leaving his identity a chilling enigma. Boy in the Box. The Boy in the Box case is one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. In February 1957, the body of a young boy, estimated to be around 4 to 6 years old, was discovered in a cardboard box in a wooded area of Philadelphia. The child was severely malnourished and bore signs of physical abuse, including bruises and scars. Despite an intensive investigation and widespread media coverage, the boy's identity and his killer remain unknown. Nicknamed the America's Unknown Child, the case has generated numerous theories, from the boy being an illegitimate child of a foster family to being sold into abuse. The mystery persists despite modern forensic efforts, including DNA testing. The boy's tragic, anonymous death continues to captivate and frustrate investigators and true crime enthusiasts alike. Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. The murders of Tupac Shakur and Christopher Wallace, known as the Notorious B.I.G., remains two of the most infamous unsolved cases in music history, often linked to the East Coast versus West Coast rap feud. Tupac was shot in a drive-by on September 7, 1996 in Las Vegas and died 6 days later. Many suspect gang retaliation, as tensions between Death Row Records and Bad Boy Records were at their peak. However, no arrests were made, and theories range from personal vendettas to larger conspiracies involving record executives or law enforcement. B.I.G. was killed on March 9, 1997 in Los Angeles in a similar drive-by shooting. His death, occurring just months after Tupac's, led to speculation about connections between the two cases. Both murders remain unsolved, fueling endless speculation and debates on what really happened. Westfield House Stalker. The Westfield Watcher case is a chilling modern mystery that began in 2014 when Derek and Maria Brodus purchased a $1.3 million home in Westfield, New Jersey. Soon after, they received anonymous letters from someone identifying as the Watcher. The letters described eerie details about the family, their children, and the house's history, claiming it had been watched for generations. The writer hinted at sinister intentions, such as using the children as blood sacrifices. Despite police investigations and the Brodus family hiring private detectives, the Watcher was never identified. Theories include a disgruntled neighbor or even a hoax by the Broduses themselves. Unable to feel safe, the family sold the house at a significant loss. The case remains unsolved, blending suburban paranoia with a disturbing, unanswered threat. Lady of Dunes. The Lady of the Dunes is an unidentified woman whose body was discovered on July 26, 1974, in a remote area of Cape Cod National Seashore in Massachusetts. She was estimated to be between 20 and 40 years old, with distinctive red hair, and had been brutally murdered. Her body was found partially decomposed, lying on a beach blanket, with her head severely beaten and her hands severed, likely to prevent identification. Despite extensive efforts, including facial reconstructions and comparisons with missing persons reports, the Lady of the Dunes' identity remains a mystery. Over the years, theories have ranged from her being a victim of a mob hit to a link with the infamous 1970s Summer of Sam killings. In 2022, advancements in DNA testing offered new hope, but the case continues to baffle investigators and remains unsolved. Great Boston Art Heist. The Great Boston Art Heist occurred on March 18, 1990, when two men dressed as police officers entered the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. They subdued the guards and stole 13 pieces of art valued at around $500 million, making it the largest art theft in history. Among the stolen works were masterpieces by Vermeer, Rembrandt, and Degas. The thieves took advantage of the museum's lack of a sophisticated security system and disappeared without a trace. Despite numerous investigations, including by the FBI, no one has been arrested for the theft, and the artworks have never been recovered. The case has been the subject of intense speculation, with some believing the works were sold on the black market, while others think they remain hidden somewhere. The theft has kept the art world on edge, as the stolen paintings continue to be a symbol of one of the most baffling unsolved crimes in art history, and kind of theft history, I guess. ABC Daycare Fire. When a fire broke out at a daycare center, killing at least 10 children and injuring several others. The fire started early in the morning, trapping the children inside while they were napping. The building, which was converted home, lacked proper fire exits and had minimal safety features, contributing to the tragic outcome. Authorities initially suspected some sort of foul play, and rumors circulated about possible arson, but despite extensive investigations, no clear evidence was found to point to a perpetrator. The cause of the fire remains uncertain, though some theories suggest electrical failure or negligence in safety precautions, or something along those lines. The case remains unsolved, with many families still seeking justice for their lost children. 21-Faced Monster. The 21-Faced Monster is a nickname given to a mysterious and elusive criminal group responsible for a series of high-profile crimes in Japan during the late 1980s and early 1990s. The group is most infamous for its involvement in the unsolved case of the 1994 and 1995 poisoning incidents, where members sent tainted food products, including curry, to multiple locations, leading to numerous people falling ill. The group also claimed responsibility for other crimes, including kidnappings and extortion attempts. What sets the 21-Faced Monster apart is its ability to evade capture while also taunting police with cryptic letters, threatening to commit further crimes if their demands weren't met. Despite extensive investigations, the group remained unidentified and the case went cold, with many theorizing that it involved a sophisticated criminal organization or even individuals within corporate sectors. Tam and Shud. The Tam and Shud case, also known as the Somerton Man case, is one of Australia's most intriguing unsolved mysteries. In December 1948, a man's body was discovered on Somerton Beach near Adelaide, with no identification and mysterious circumstances surrounding his death. A small scrap of paper with the words Taman Shud, meaning ended or finished in Persian, was found hidden in a secret compartment of his pants. This led investigators to a copy of a book of Persian poetry, which contained a coded message. The man's identity and cause of death remain unknown, despite numerous investigations, including advanced forensic tests and cryptographic analysis of the code. Several theories exist, including espionage and a connection to a secret intelligence operation, but nothing has been definitively proven. The Tam and Shud case continues to baffle both investigators and amateur sleuths, with the true identity and fate of the Somerton Man remaining one of Australia's most perplexing cold cases. Isdal Unknown Woman. The Isdal woman is an unidentified female whose body was found in Isdalen Valley, Norway, on November 29, 1970. Her death remains one of Norway's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. The woman, estimated to be in her 30s, was discovered partially burned and with multiple layers of clothing, some of which had been cut to remove labels. So, super weird, but a briefcase near the body contained cryptic notes and documents that were later destroyed by police. Another weird part of this case. Investigators found traces of poison, and it was believed she died from a combination of poisoning and exposure to fire. The circumstances of her death suggest possible espionage, with theories ranging from her being a spy for a foreign government to being involved in organized crime. Despite a thorough investigation, no one has ever been able to identify the Isdal woman, and her cause of death remains a mystery. The case has remained cold. Hinterkaifeck Murders. The Hinterkaifeck murders, which occurred in 1922 in rural Germany, remains one of the most baffling unsolved crimes in history, especially German history. The 6 members of the Gruber family, who lived on a remote farm known as Hinterkaifeck, were brutally murdered with a pickaxe. The killer, or killers, left no clear motive, and the crime scene suggested that the victims were likely lured or trapped inside. What makes the case even more eerie is the strange events leading up to the murders. Neighbors reported seeing footprints in the snow leading to the house but not back out, suggesting that the killer had stayed on the farm for several days, living among the family's animals. Despite an extensive investigation, no one was ever charged or found, and the crime remains unsolved. Some theories suggest the involvement of a family member or a disgruntled worker, while others speculate on supernatural explanations. The Hinterkaifeck murders continue to haunt German crime lore, unsolved and shrouded in mystery. Theft of the 300 million yen. The theft of the 300 million yen occurred in Japan in 1968 and remains one of the most infamous unsolved robberies in the country's history. On December 10th of that year, a truck carrying 300 million yen, which was approximately $1 million USD today, was hijacked while en route from Tokyo to the Bank of Japan. The heist was meticulously planned, as the truck was ambushed by a group of armed robbers who forced the driver and his assistant into a van. The thieves then escaped with the money, leaving no trace behind. And over the years, various theories have emerged, including the possibility of insider involvement or ties to organized crime, but the mystery endures. The 300 million yen theft remains an iconic unsolved crime in Japan's criminal history. Times Square 2008 bombing. The 2008 Times Square bombing is an unsolved case involving a bombing attempt that occurred on May 1st, 2008 in New York City. A bomb was planted in an SUV parked on 45th Street near Times Square, one of the busiest and most popular tourist locations in the world. The device, which contained propane tanks, gasoline, and fireworks, failed to detonate, thank God, preventing what could have been a catastrophic attack. A street vendor noticed smoke coming from the vehicle and alerted the police, who safely removed the bomb before it could explode. Despite a large-scale investigation, the individual or group behind the failed bombing was never apprehended. The case remains open, with authorities speculating it could be connected to domestic or international terrorism. The event raised questions about security measures in high-profile areas and remains a reminder of how quickly threats can emerge in the heart of one of the world's most famous cities. And the true motives behind the attack, however, remain a mystery. Burger Chef Homicides. The Burger Chef Homicides referred to 1978 murders of 4 young employees at a Burger Chef restaurant in Speedway, Indiana. On November 17, 1978, 2 male and 2 female workers, aged 16 to 20, were abducted from the restaurant after closing. Their bodies were found 2 days later in a wooded area, each showing signs of being brutally beaten and shot. The crime shocked the local community, and despite efforts from law enforcement, the case went cold. And over the years, several theories have emerged, including links to local drug activity, a robbery gone wrong, and even the possibility of serial killings. In 2018, DNA evidence led to a breakthrough with the identifications of a potential suspect, though no arrests have been made. And the Burger Chef homicides remain an open case, with investigators still trying to piece together the details of that very tragic night. I-70 Killer. The I-70 Killer is a nickname given to an unidentified serial killer responsible for a series of murders along, as you probably guessed from the name, I-70, or Interstate 70, which stretches from Utah to Missouri. Between 1992 and 1993, at least 6 victims were shot and killed in small retail stores or gas stations in towns near the highway, including locations in Missouri, Kansas, and Indiana. The victims were typically young women, and the killings were just brutal, involving shots to the head with a .22 caliber firearm. What makes the case even more chilling is the lack of a clear pattern or motive, making it very hard to track the killer down. The killer would enter the store, commit the murder, and then vanish without a trace, leaving little evidence behind. Despite various theories and FBI involvement, the identity of the I-70 killer remains a mystery. Some speculated the killer may have been a personal connection to the victims, while others believed the murders were part of a broader, unsolved series. The case has become one of the most perplexing cold cases in criminal history, with, as I said, the case remaining open. Setagaya family homicide. The Setagaya family homicide occurred on December 31st, 2000 in the Setagaya neighborhood of Tokyo, Japan. The victims were the Miyawaza family, parents, a daughter, and a son, who were brutally murdered in the home. The killer, or killers, entered the house while the family slept and fatally stabbed all 4 members. Evidence suggested the attacker stayed in the house for hours after the killings, eating food, drinking drinks, and even using the bathroom. What makes the case particularly chilling is the lack of a motive and the eerie behavior of the killer. The family's belongings were undisturbed, ruling out robbery as a motive, and DNA left at the crime scene, as well as other physical evidence, has been analyzed, but no suspects have ever been identified. The case remains one of Japan's most infamous unsolved murders, and the killer's ability to commit such a brutal crime then calmly leave without detection has made the Setagaya family homicide a haunting mystery in criminal history. Phantom Killer. The Phantom Killer is the name given to an unidentified serial killer responsible for a series of murders and attacks in Texarkana, Texas in 1946. Over the span of several months, the killer, also known as the Moonlight Murders, targeted young couples parked in isolated areas. The first attacks occurred on February 22nd, 1946, when 2 teenagers, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Laney, were brutally assaulted and shot. They survived, but their attacker's identity remained a mystery. Later that spring, 2 more victims, Betty Joe Booker and Paul Martin, were killed in a similar manner, with their bodies found on remote roads. Despite extensive investigations and a media frenzy, the Phantom Killer was never apprehended. The case remained unsolved, leading to speculation about multiple suspects, including local residents and even connections to organized crime. The Phantom Killer's identity remains one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history, with the case having inspired several different books, films, and ongoing interest from true crime enthusiasts. Wall Street 1920 explosion. The Wall Street 1920 explosion was a devastating bombing that occurred on September 16, 1920, in the heart of New York City's financial district. A horse-drawn wagon filled with 100 pounds of dynamite and 500 pounds of heavy cast iron sash weights was detonated on Wall Street, outside the J.P. Morgan & Co. building. The explosion killed over 30 people and injured more than 300, causing widespread panic in the city. The bombing was likely an act of some sort of political terrorism, possibly carried out by anarchists or radical groups who were protesting against the US government and capitalism, which they viewed as oppressive. While there were several suspects, including Italian anarchists, no one was ever caught or charged with the bombing. Investigations were hindered by a lack of evidence, and despite various theories, the true perpetrators remain unknown. And the Wall Street explosion remains one of the most mysterious acts of domestic terrorism in US history. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper is perhaps the most infamous unidentified serial killer in history, just being very famous. Active in the Whitechapel district of London in 1888, the killer brutally murdered at least 5 women, all of whom were prostitutes. The victims, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were all gruesomely mutilated, with several having their throats slashed and their bodies disemboweled. Despite a massive police investigation, Jack the Ripper was never caught, and his identity remains one of the greatest mysteries in criminal history. The case became a media sensation, with newspapers fueling public fear and fascination. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged, ranging from the possibility of the killer being a local doctor to theories involving royalty or organized crime. But despite modern forensic techniques, the killer's identity remains elusive, and most likely will always remain elusive since it just happened, forever ago. There's no way they're going to be able to figure it out. Tier 2. 20th Century Limited Train. The 20th Century Limited Train was a luxury passenger train operated by the New York Central Railroad from 1902 to 1967, running between New York City and Chicago. It was known for its elegance, speed, and high-class service, attracting wealthy passengers, celebrities, and business magnates. The train was famous for its streamlined design and sophisticated amenities, which included fine dining, plush seating, and luxurious sleeping accommodations. In terms of unsolved mysteries, the 20th Century Limited gained notoriety in its years of operation for a series of crimes and mysterious events. One of the most notable incidents occurred in 1938 when a jewelry heist took place on board, with a group of thieves managing to steal diamonds and valuable items from a passenger's private compartment. The case was never fully solved, and the robbers were never apprehended. Jack the Stripper. Jack the Stripper is a nickname given to an unidentified serial killer who terrorized London in the early 1960s, active between 1964 and 1965. The killer murdered at least 6 women, all of whom were prostitutes. The victims' bodies were found abandoned in or near the river Thames, with signs of strangulation and post-mortem mutilation. The killer's modus operandi involved undressing the victims and leaving them in public places, often without their clothing. The case has similarities to the Jack the Ripper murders, though it occurred nearly a century later. Investigations were complicated by the lack of physical evidence, and many suspects were considered, including local men, police officers, and even a possible connection to a man named William Billy Wilkins, who was arrested in 1965 but never convicted. And despite extensive efforts by police, including the use of forensic methods that were groundbreaking at the time, the true identity of Jack the Stripper was never uncovered. Austin Yogurt Shop Massacre. The Austin Yogurt Shop Massacre occurred on December 6, 1991, when 4 teenage girls were brutally murdered at that I can't believe it's yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. The victims, Eliza Thomas, Sarah Harbinson, Amy Ayers, and Jennifer Harbinson, were all working at the store late at night when they were shot and killed. The crime was made even more chilling by the fact that the perpetrators set the store on fire, likely in an attempt to cover up the evidence. In the aftermath, there was an intense investigation, but no solid leads or suspects followed. Several people were initially arrested, including a group of young men who were later released after DNA evidence failed to link them to the crime. And over the years, the case went cold, and theories about the motive, the identity of the killers, and potential suspects continued to evolve. And in 2008, after a re-examination of DNA evidence, new developments resurfaced, leading to a reopening of the case. But as of now, the Austin Yogurt Shop massacre continues to remain unsolved, leaving the families of the victims searching for answers. John F. Kennedy. Now, this is a very deep case, and I could make like an hour-long documentary on all of the unsolved mystery of John F. Kennedy's assassination, but I'll try to keep this short. The assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963 remains one of the most widely discussed unsolved mysteries in American history. Kennedy, the 35th president of the United States, was shot while riding in a motorcade through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested and charged with the murder, but questions about whether he acted alone or as part of a larger conspiracy have persisted for decades. Oswald was killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby before he could stand trial, adding to the mystery. Multiple investigations, including the Warren Commission, concluded that Oswald acted alone, but many conspiracy theories have emerged, suggesting involvement by various groups, including the Mafia, the CIA, or even factions within the US government. The lack of any sort of clear answer and conflicting eyewitness accounts and inconsistencies in the evidence have fueled ongoing debates. Despite numerous books, documentaries, and public interest, the true circumstances surrounding Kennedy's death remains unsolved, and the case continues to captivate the imagination of historians, researchers, and conspiracy theorists alike. Flight 2511. TWA Flight 2511 was a domestic passenger flight from New York to Chicago that exploded mid-air on June 30th, 1962, killing all 58 people on board. The Boeing 707 was en route to its destination when it suddenly disintegrated while flying over western Pennsylvania. The explosion occurred at around 39,000 feet, and debris from the aircraft was scattered over a wide area. An investigation by the Civil Aeronautics Board initially suggested that a bomb might have been responsible, as pieces of the aircraft appeared to have been blown outward. Despite thorough investigation, the case remains unsolved, and several theories emerged, including the possibility of a bomb placed on board by a passenger, but no clear evidence was ever found of that. And the airline has been investigating the possibility of a hijacking or sabotage, but no suspects were ever identified. There were also theories about mechanical failure, though a bomb was considered the most likely cause. And the lack of conclusive evidence, combined with the complexity of the investigation, left the tragedy of an unsolved mystery, with questions surrounding the true cause of the explosion still remaining today. Doodler. The Doodler is the nickname given to an unidentified serial killer who operated in San Francisco during the mid-1970s. The killer is believed to have murdered at least 5 men between 1974 and 1975, though some investigators speculate there may have been more victims. The name Doodler comes from a description given by one of the survivors, who mentioned that the killer had drawn sketches of his victims before killing them, leading to the belief that he was an artist or someone with a penchant for drawing. The victims, all gay men, were attached in secluded areas, and the murderers were marked by a similar pattern. Each victim was stabbed multiple times, often in a brutal and unprovoked manner. Though police had several leads and suspects, including a sketch of the killer, no arrests were ever made, and the case went cold. And the Doodler's identity still remains unknown. Big L. Big L, born Lamont Coleman, was a prominent American rapper who was tragically shot and killed on February 15, 1999 in Harlem, New York. Big L was known for his sharp lyrical ability and is often regarded as one of the pioneers of East Coast hip-hop, especially for his contributions to underground rap. He was in the process of gaining mainstream recognition when his life was cut short at the age of 24. He was shot multiple times while sitting in a car outside his home. The circumstances surrounding Big L's murder remain unclear. Initially, some speculated that his death was related to a feud with another rapper or perhaps due to street violence. However, there were also rumors about a possible connection to the notorious gang-related activities in Harlem at the time. And several different theories have emerged, but no one has ever been arrested or charged in connection with his murder. Lady D. The death of Princess Diana, commonly known as Lady Di, on August 31st, 1997 remains one of the most controversial and widely debated events in modern history. Diana, the Princess of Wales, died in a car crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris, alongside her companion, Dottie Faed, and their driver, Henry Paul. The official investigation concluded that the crash was caused by the driver losing control while under the influence of alcohol, while the paparazzi in pursuit at the time. However, conspiracy theories have persisted, claiming that Diana's death was not an accident. Some suggest it was a planned murder orchestrated by the British royal family, the intelligence agencies, or some sort of other powerful figure, often citing the princess's contentious relationship with the royal family in her humanitarian work. Numerous investigations, including an inquiry by the British authorities, found no evidence to support these claims, but the suspicions and rumors remained. Diana's death and the subsequent media frenzy left many unanswered questions and continues to captivate the public imagination to this day. Dorothy Kilgallen. Dorothy Kilgallen was a prominent American journalist and television personality, best known for her role as a panelist on the popular TV show What's My Line, and her investigative journalism, especially her reporting on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Kilgallen's death on November 8, 1965, has been the subject of speculation and controversy, as she was found dead in her Manhattan apartment from what was officially ruled as an overdose. Kilgallen's connection to the Kennedy assassination made her death even more mysterious. She had been investigating the assassination for months, including the trial of Jack Ruby, who killed Lee Harvey Oswald, Kennedy's alleged assassin. Kilgallen reportedly had exclusive access to information about Ruby's trial, and some suggest that she was on the verge of uncovering a major story when she died. Pretty suspect. The circumstances of her death have raised suspicions, with theories ranging from S-word to foul play. Some believe that Kilgallen's investigation into the Kennedy assassination may have made her a prime target for who knows. Though there is no concrete evidence to support any of these theories, and to this day her death remains one of the unsolved mysteries of the 1960s. MH370. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 disappeared on March 8, 2014 while en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, with 239 people on board. The plane lost contact with air traffic control less than an hour after takeoff, and it was last tracked by radar over the South China Sea. Despite extensive search efforts, only a few confirmed pieces of the aircraft, including a wing flaperon, have been found washed up on islands in the Indian Ocean, and the disappearance has led to widespread speculation and conspiracy theories. Official investigators, led by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, concluded that the aircraft likely ended up somewhere along a remote stretch of the southern Indian Ocean, based on satellite data of the southern Indian Ocean and just showing the plane's communication with a satellite ground station. However, no wreckage was ever found in the primary search area, leading some to question the conclusions and where it really kind of went. Various theories about the cause of the disappearance have emerged, including hijacking, pilot involvement, and some sort of mechanical failure, but no definitive explanation has ever been established. Nancy Spungen. Nancy Spungen was an American woman who became infamous for her tumultuous relationship with Sex Pistols bassist Sid Vicious, and for her tragic death in 1978. Spungen was found dead in the Shishla Hotel in New York City from a stab wound to the abdomen. Vicious, who was arrested and charged with her murder, later died of a heroin overdose before standing trial, adding to the mystery surrounding her death. While many believe Vicious was responsible, the circumstances of Spungen's death remain unclear. There are conflicting theories about whether she was killed in a violent argument or whether someone else may have been involved, and some suggest that Vicious may have been too high to remember committing the act, or that he may have been framed. Others speculate that Spungen's death was a result of a botched drug deal or a darker conspiracy within the punk rock scene. The case was never fully resolved, and it remains one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries of the 1970s, especially within the punk rock kind of sphere. Las Cruces Bowling Alley Shooting. The Las Cruces Bowling Alley shooting took place on February 10, 1990 at the Las Cruces Bowl in Las Cruces, New Mexico. During the early morning hours, a man entered the bowling alley and opened fire, killing 2 employees and injuring 4 others. The victims were working the night shift at the alley when they were ambushed. The shooter, described as a man in his 20s or 30s, fired indiscriminately at the victims before fleeing the scene. Despite a significant investigation, including a composite sketch of the suspect, the case remains unsolved. The motives behind the attacks are just unclear, and no arrests have ever been made in connection with the shooting. But theories about the crime vary, with some speculating that it could have been a robbery gone wrong, while others suggest a more personal vendetta against the bowling alley. But the Las Cruces bowling alley shooting has haunted the community for decades, with no closure for the families or the victims or law enforcement. Lane Bryant shooting. The Lane Bryant shooting occurred on February 2, 2008 at a Lane Bryant clothing store in the Chicago suburb of Tinley Park, Illinois. A man entered the store around closing time, forced 5 women into the back room, and then opened fire, killing 5 and injuring 1. The suspect fled the scene, and despite a significant investigation, the case remains unsolved. The killer was described as a man in his 20s or 30s, approximately 5'9", and with a medium build, and he wore a mask during the crime and left no clear evidence behind. Surveillance footage showed him entering the store, but his identity was never confirmed. The police theory is that the motive was likely a robbery, as there were signs that the killer may have attempted to take money from the store's safe before launching the attack. But despite numerous leads and theories, including that the killer may have been a local, no arrests have been made. Alberto Nisman. Alberto Nisman was an Argentine prosecutor who was found dead in his apartment on January 18, 2015, just days before he was scheduled to present a report accusing Argentine President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner and other high-ranking officials of covering up Iran's involvement in the 1994 bombing of the AMIA Jewish Center in Buenos Aires. His death was initially ruled a S-word, but many, including his family and colleagues, believed he was murdered to silence him. Nisman had been investigating the bombing for over a decade, which resulted in 85 deaths and hundreds of injuries. He alleged that the top officials in Argentina had sought to shield Iranian officials from prosecution, possibly in exchange for economic and political factors. His report was set to present evidence that would implicate both Argentine and Iranian officials in the attack, and the circumstances of Nisman's death remain just, suspicious. Investigations into the case may have been marred by controversy, with multiple theories suggesting foul play, including political motivations or retaliation by those involved in the alleged cover-up. Smiler Face Killer Theory. The Smiler Face Killer Theory refers to the series of mysterious deaths that have been linked to an alleged serial killer operated in the United States. The name Smiler Face Killer comes from the idea that the killer leaves behind a chilling clue, smiley face graffiti, near the bodies of the victims, though there is no definitive evidence linking the graffiti to a specific killer, so it could have just been coincidence. The theory was proposed by retired detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte in the early 2000s. They believed that a string of deaths, mostly of college-aged men, were not accidental drownings, as initially reported, but instead the work of a serial killer or group of killers. The victims typically disappeared while out drinking and were later found dead in bodies of water, often in places near college campuses. The detectives theorized that the killers or killer lured the men to these locations before drowning them. While the theory has gained attention, it remains controversial, and many experts continue to argue that the deaths could have been just accidental or due to alcohol-related incidents. Bandit Geezer. The Bandit Geezer is a nickname given to an unidentified criminal who was active in the United Kingdom during the 1990s and early 2000s. The term Bandit Geezer is often used to describe a figure who was notorious for committing a series of high-profile bank robberies. He became infamous for his ability to execute elaborate heists, often targeting banks and financial institutions across the country. The robberies were marked by precise planning, where the Bandit Geezer would typically enter the banks wearing a disguise and using force to intimidate staff and customers. And despite being the subject of a prolonged investigation by law enforcement, the Bandit Geezer's true identity was never confirmed, and the robberies continued for several years. What made his crimes especially puzzling was his ability to evade capture despite being the focus of widespread media attention. Some speculated that he may have had ties to criminal networks or was just acting alone as a highly skilled professional criminal. But the mystery surrounding his identity and the motivation behind his robberies remains unsolved, and with many of his crimes still accounted for. As of now, the Bandit Geezer's criminal activities remain one of the most unresolved mysteries in the realm of British crime. Syrian gas ballistic missiles. The use of chemical weapons, including sarin gas and ballistic missiles by the Syrian government, has been a significant and controversial aspect of the ongoing Syrian civil war, which began in 2011. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's regime has been accused of using chemical weapons against both civilian populations and rebel forces, leading to widespread international condemnation. The most notable and widely reported incident occurred on August 24, 2013 in Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus, where a sarin gas attack killed hundreds of people. This attack led to global outcry, with many governments, including the United States, accusing the Assad regime of using chemical weapons in violation of international law. The Syrian government, however, denied responsibility, blaming opposition groups for the attack. A United Nations investigation later confirmed to the use of sarin, but it did not conclusively attribute blame to the Assad regime. In addition to chemical weapons, Syria has utilized ballistic missiles as part of its military strategy during the conflict. These missiles, often launched from air bases or mobile platforms, have been used to target oppositional-held areas, including civilian infrastructure. The combination of ballistic missile strikes and chemical weapons attacks has drawn the attention of the international community, with some countries calling for military intervention or stronger sanctions. Despite attempts to limit Syria's chemical weapons arsenal, including an agreement brokered by the US and Russia in 2013 to dismantle Syria's chemical stockpiles, there have been reports of subsequent chemical attacks in Syria. And the ongoing use of such weapons alongside the use of ballistic missiles continues to be a point of contention in the war, with little resolution in sight. And the situation remains one of the most severe examples of war crimes and unresolved international disputes regarding weapons of mass destruction. Alright, let's get into Tier 3. Torso Killer. The Torso Killer is the nickname given to an unidentified serial killer responsible for a series of brutal murders in the 1970s, primarily in the New York City area. The killer's modus operandi involved dismembering victims, leaving their torsos in public areas while disposing of other body parts elsewhere, so super disturbing. The first known victim was found in 1973, and the killings continued for several years after. The police believed that the killer had some knowledge of anatomy due to their precision of the dismemberments. Despite a number of suspects over the years, including the infamous John Doe, who was connected to various unsolved murders, the Torso Killer's identity remains unknown. Tire Deflator Killer. The Tire Deflator Killer is a nickname given to an unidentified serial killer who operated in the United States in the 1980s and 1990s. The killer gained this name due to a distinctive pattern of what you'd guess from the name is the victims' cars were often found with their tires deflated, a tactic that would force the drivers to stop in remote, isolated areas. Once the victims were stranded, the killer would approach and murder them, sometimes in violent and ritualistic ways. While there are several suspected killings connected to the Tire Deflator Killer, the lack of any sort of conclusive evidence and the absence of a clear motive or signature have made it difficult for law enforcement to track down the responsible individual. The killer's method of targeting seemingly random victims in vulnerable situations and then evading capture has made the case one of the more baffling unsolved mysteries in criminal history and just very hard for the police to track down. Yavon Fletcher. Yavon Fletcher was a British police officer who was tragically shot and killed on April 17, 1984, while on duty outside the Libyan embassy in London. Fletcher was standing near the embassy while shots were fired from within the building, hitting her in the back. And this is odd because, it's coming from inside the building outwards, and that's just not usual. Despite efforts to save her, she died from her injuries, and the incident occurred during a protest outside the embassy, with demonstrators rallying against the Libyan government. The shooting led to a lengthy investigation, but the identity of the shooter remains unknown. While many believe that the gunfire came from someone inside the embassy, Libyan officials denied any sort of involvement. And the case became a diplomatic issue, and the British government expelled several Libyan diplomats in response to this whole event. And despite several attempts, no one has ever even been prosecuted for Fletcher's murder, leaving the case as one of the more significant unsolved mysteries in British policing. Itavia 810 flight. Itavia Flight 810 was a tragic incident that occurred on June 27, 1980, when a passenger plane operated by the Italian airline Itavia crashed into the Syrian Sea near the island of Ustica, killing all 81 people on board. The aircraft was en route from Bologna to Palermo when it suddenly disappeared from radar and crashed with no distress signal sent, so pretty weird. The cause of the crash remains one of Italy's most significant aviation mysteries. Initial investigations suggested some sort of technical failure with the plane, but later theories pointed to a potential missile strike, possibly fired by a military aircraft. Some theories implicate NATO forces or the Libyan government, suggesting that the flight may have been caught in the middle of a covert operation or some sort of military conflict people didn't know about. And despite extensive investigations and numerous theories, the exact cause of the crash has never been definitively determined, leaving the Itavia 810 disaster as one of the most enduring and unresolved mysteries in Italian aviation history. Skid Row. Skid Row, located in downtown Los Angeles, is a neighborhood that has long been associated with homelessness, poverty, and crime. While the area has a history dating back to the early 20th century, it became notorious in the 70s and 80s for its high concentration of homeless individuals, many of whom lived in tents or makeshift shelters on the streets. However, beyond its reputation as a homeless enclave, Skid Row has been the site of several unsolved mysteries and strange occurrences. One of the most chilling stories connected to the Skid Row is the Skid Row murders that occurred in the 80s and 90s, where several bodies of homeless individuals were found under just weird circumstances. The murders, often linked to serial killers, raised concerns about the safety of people living on the streets. Despite numerous investigations and theories, many of these cases remain unsolved. And it's very hard to solve these crimes because many of the homeless people didn't have a solid family to go back to and ask questions about, and they didn't have any sort of ID on them. So it's very hard to even trace who these people were, and very much harder to trace who the killer was. Dardine Homicide. The Dardine Homicide refers to the brutal murders of the Dardine family in the small town of Ena, Illinois in 1987. The victims were 28-year-old Keith Dardine, his 25-year-old wife Elaine, and their 3-year-old son Peter. The bodies were all discovered in their home on November 18, 1987, with signs of just extreme violence. Keith Dardine had been shot multiple times, while Elaine and Peter were found in just a horrific state, suggesting they were SA'd and also murdered. What makes this case especially mysterious is the lack of any sort of clear evidence pointing to a suspect. No DNA, no anything. There were no signs of forced entry, and the family's car was stolen, but later found abandoned. So just very weird. Several individuals have been questioned over the years, including a man named Ricky McLean, but no arrests were made and no charges against him were made. And the case has led to many theories, including the possibility of a robbery gone wrong or a targeted attack, but the true motive and identity of the killer or killers remains unsolved. Colonial Parkway Homicides. The Colonial Parkway Homicides refer to a series of unsolved murders that took place between 1986 and 1989 along the Colonial Parkway in Virginia, which connects the historic towns of Williamsburg, Yorktown, and Jamestown. 4 couples, including 2 men and 2 women, were brutally murdered in what authorities believe was the work of a serial killer. The victims, who were in their 20s and 30s, were either shot or strangled, and their cars were found abandoned along the parkway. In 2 cases, the victims were found bound together, suggesting the killer's methodical and personal nature to the victims and the crime. And the cases have baffled investigators for decades due to the lack of physical evidence and witnesses. Though several suspects have been identified, including potential links to other unsolved murders, no one has been arrested or charged. Some theories suggest the killer may have been targeting couples, while others believe the murders could be the work of a lone perpetrator with a grudge against couples or the area. And despite numerous theories and leads, the Colonial Parkway Homicides remain one of Virginia's most enduring and chilling unsolved mysteries. Sam's Septic Tank. The Sam Septic Tank mystery refers to the unresolved case of a man named Sam, whose body was discovered in a septic tank in 2000 in the rural area of the United States. The case gained attention due to the peculiar circumstances surrounding his death. Sam, whose full name has not been publicly revealed, was reported missing by his family, but his disappearance was not immediately considered suspicious. However, after months of searching for him, his body was discovered inside a septic tank on a property he had visited. The tank had been buried and was difficult to access, raising questions about how Sam even ended up there. Investigators speculated that he may have been murdered and that his body was hidden to avoid detection, but despite extensive investigation, no arrests have been made, and the case remains unsolved. And it's just a super weird case because, like, how the hell did he end up in a septic tank? Proctor Valley Road Jane Doe. Proctor Valley Road Jane Doe refers to the unidentified remains of a woman discovered on November 6, 1969, along Proctor Valley Road in Chula Vista, California. Her body was found in a remote area, partially decomposed, and her identity remains a mystery to this day, given the Jane Doe name. The woman, estimated to be in her 20s, had been strangled and was left in an isolated location, leading investigators to believe she was the victim of a homicide. And despite efforts to identify her through forensic evidence and a nationwide search for missing persons, the Proctor Valley Road Jane Doe's identity remains unknown. And over the years, several theories and potential links to other unsolved murders in the area have been proposed, but none have led to any solid breakthrough. And the case remains open, and the mystery of who she was, why she was killed, and by whom continues to haunt the community and authorities. Valentines Day Massacre. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre refers to a notorious 1929 crime in Chicago, where 7 members of the George Bugs Morin's North Side Italian gang were all brutally murdered. The massacre occurred on February 14th at a garage in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. The victims, including Morin's top lieutenants, were lined up against a wall and shot by men using Tommy guns, leading to speculation that it was the work of a rival gangster, Al Capone's South Side Irish gang. While Capone was heavily suspected, the true perpetrators have never been conclusively identified. Investigators were unable to gather enough evidence to charge anyone, and the case remains one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in organized crime history. And over the years, numerous theories have been emerged, but no one was ever connected or convicted of the murders. Sherry Jo Bates. Sherry Jo Bates was an 18-year-old college student who was brutally murdered on October 30th, 1966 in Riverside, California. Her body was found near the library of Riverside City College, and she had been stabbed multiple times. A key detail in this case was a letter that was sent to the local newspaper, which included a detailed account of the crime and claimed responsibility. So this was most likely sent by the killer. The letter, which resembled others sent by the Zodiac Killer, contained cryptic messages and taunts to the police, leading to speculation that the two cases could be connected. And could this be the work of the Zodiac Killer? But despite extensive investigations, no one was ever charged with Bates' murder. Many believe the Zodiac Killer might have been involved, but no evidence was found to link him to the crime. And over the years, various suspects have been considered, but the case remained cold. And in 2020, DNA testing led to new developments, including a potential link to a man named Gary Francis Post, though no charges have been filed. And Sherry Jo Bates' murder remains a haunting unsolved mysteries, with lingering questions about its connection to the Zodiac Killer. Handmade Annihilator. The Handmade Annihilator is a nickname given to an unidentified killer responsible for a series of brutal murders of women in the 1990s. The murders, which occurred in various parts of the United States, were marked by disturbing similarities. Victims were typically found in isolated locations, and many showed signs of severe physical abuse. The killer's method of targeting seemingly random women, often in vulnerable or secluded settings, led to speculation that there might be a pattern or specific type of victim the killer sought. The name Handmade Annihilator emerged due to the way some of the victims were found, often resembling figures in medieval or dystopian imagery. While there were no clear motive for the killings and little forensic evidence, the killings gained public attention due to their gruesome nature and the eerie resemblance of certain fictional characters. Despite numerous theories, the killer's identity remains unknown. Uset Hacker. The Uset Hacker is an alias associated with a mysterious individual or group who carried out cyber attacks in the early days of the internet, especially on Usenet. a popular early internet communication platform. In the late 80s and early 1990s, the hacker gained notoriety for infiltrating Usenet news groups, posting provocative and sometimes harmful content, and manipulating systems in ways that caused significant disruption. The hacker was able to exploit vulnerabilities in Usenet software, accessing private information, and spreading malicious posts under various usernames. Bible John. Bible John is the nickname given to an unidentified serial killer responsible for the murders of 3 women in Glasgow, Scotland between 1968 and 1969. The victims, Patricia Docker, Jemima McDonald, and Helen Puddock, were all young women who had attended the Barrowland Ballroom, a popular dance venue. They were later found murdered, having been beaten and strangled, and witnesses linked the 3 cases to a man who had reportedly quoted Bible passages during conversations, earning him the moniker Bible John. The suspect was described as a well-dressed, polite individual in his late 20s or early 30s with reddish hair. He was reportedly seen leaving with the victims on the nights they were killed, and despite investigations, including interviews with thousands of potential suspects, Bible John was never identified. Some theories suggested he might have stopped killing or just left the area as a whole, while others proposed that his identity was obscured due to the limited forensic techniques available at the time. The case remains one of Scotland's most infamous unsolved mysteries, leaving questions about the killer's identity and motive unanswered for over 5 decades. West Mesa Bone Collector. The West Mesa Bone Collector refers to an unidentified serial killer responsible for the murders of 11 women whose remains were discovered in 2009 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The victims, many of whom were involved in work or struggling with addiction, disappeared between 2001 and 2005. Their skeletal remains were found buried in a desert area during a construction project, with no significant evidence pointing to the killer's identity. Investigators have charged several suspects, but no one has ever been charged. The killer's nickname, Bone Collector, highlights the chilling and organized nature of the crime scene, and of course, bones. The case remains one of Albuquerque's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Julia Wallace. The murder of Julia Wallace in Liverpool, England in 1931 remains one of the most perplexing unsolved cases in British history. Julia was found brutally beaten to death in her home on January 20th, 1931. The crime was discovered by her husband, William Herbert Wallace, who had been out that evening following a mysterious message left at his chess club, directing him to a non-existent address. William was initially convicted of Julia's murder, but the conviction was overturned on the appeal to insufficient evidence, a rare occurrence at the time. The peculiar circumstances of the crime, including the cryptic chess club message and the lack of forensic evidence tying William to the scene, has fueled endless speculation. Theories range from William's involvement to a staged robbery gone wrong, and the case continues to baffle true crime enthusiasts to this day. Mad Gasser of Matun. The Mad Gasser of Matun refers to a mysterious figure blamed for a series of gas attacks in Matun, Illinois in 1944. Victims reported a sickly sweet smell followed by symptoms like nausea, paralysis, and vomiting, so some pretty insane symptoms. Some claim to see a shadowy figure fleeing the scenes, but despite investigations, no physical evidence, suspect, or motive was ever identified. The attacks caused widespread panic, and the local media fueled the hysteria with sensationalized reports. Police initially suggested that the incidents were caused by chemical leaks or just mass hysteria, but these explanations left many unconvinced. Theories have ranged from a deranged individual to a military experiment gone awry, and the phenomenon abruptly stopped after a few weeks, adding to the mystery. And to this day, the identity and intent of the Mad Gasser remains unknown. Holiday Inn Fire. The Holiday Inn Fire in 1980 in Kansas City, Missouri is an unsettling unsolved mystery. On November 29th, a fire broke out in the hotel, specifically in the hotel's restaurant and lounge area. The fire caused the deaths of at least 25 people, and dozens more were injured. The tragedy was especially horrifying because many victims were trapped on the upper floors, unable to escape the flames. Investigators initially suspected arson of some sort, but the cause of the fire was never definitively determined. And the lack of conclusive evidence about how the fire even started, combined with multiple failed attempts to pinpoint a suspect, left the case unsolved. The hotel had been overcrowded that night due to a large convention, which led to confusion and panic during the evacuation when the fire started. The tragedy remains one of Kansas City's deadliest fires, and the mystery surrounding its cause continues to haunt both the survivors and the city. Ketty Murders. The Ketty Murders, a horrific crime that took place in 1981 in Ketty, California, is an infamous unsolved mystery. On April 12, 1981, Sue Sharp and her two children, Tina and Johnny, were brutally murdered in their remote cabin. Tina's younger siblings were unharmed, but the crime scene was horrific. Sue and Johnny were found bludgeoned, while Tina's body was discovered days later in a nearby woods. The case has confounded investigators for decades. Early suspects included local residents, but there were no clear motives or evidence linking anyone to the crime, and theories have ranged from drug-related violence to personal vendettas against the family, but none have led to any sort of arrest. A breakthrough did come in the 2000s when a suspect was publicly named, but still the case remains unsolved. And the brutality and mystery surrounding the killings, along with the eerie, isolated location of Ketty, continue to captivate true crime enthusiasts. The case remains one of Northern California's most haunting unsolved murders. Tier 4. Tier Killer. The Tier Killer is the nickname given to an unidentified serial killer believed to have operated in the United States during the early 1900s, especially around the 1930s. The killer earned the nickname due to the peculiar nature of the murders. Victims, all young women, were found with tears in their eyes, as though they had died while crying. Each of the victims was also discovered in a state of distress with signs of suffocation or asphyxiation, though no visible wounds. The case remains unsolved, and the identity of the Tier Killer has never been discovered. Speculation about the killer's motives and methods has ranged from ritualistic murder to a psychopathic desire to terrorize, and it's just also super weird how every single one of the victims had tears in their eyes when they were found. Slave Master. The Slave Master is a name given to an unidentified serial killer or R-worder who terrorized parts of the United States, especially in the 70s and 80s. The name originates from the brutal nature of the attacks, and which often involved the victim being bound and subjected to intense violence before being abandoned or left in remote areas. There were chilling similarities between the attacks, with victims typically being women, many of whom were left alive but severely traumatized. And despite numerous investigations and the profile of the killer matching certain patterns of other known criminals, the Slave Master was never caught. Many speculated that the killer's actions were driven by a need to dominate or control people, with the slave aspect being reflected in the forced subjugation of the victims. The case remains unsolved, and the Slave Master is often mentioned in discussions about elusive serial criminals whose identities are forever hidden. El Dorado Jane Doe. El Dorado Jane Doe refers to an unidentified woman whose body was discovered in El Dorado County, California in 1996. The woman, believed to be between 15 and 25 years old, was found along a remote highway. She had been brutally murdered with signs of blunt force trauma and strangulation. Despite efforts to identify her through forensic analysis and a wide media campaign, her identity remained a mystery for years. The case became even more perplexing when it was revealed that no one had reported her missing in the area, making it difficult to establish connections to potential victims or people who have gone missing recently. Investigators also struggled with tracking her background, as there were no clear clues pointing to who she was. El Dorado Jane Doe remains an unresolved case, and despite advances in forensic technology such as DNA testing, her identity has never been discovered. JAT 367 Flight. JAT Flight 367 was a tragic and mysterious aviation disaster that occurred on January 23, 1972. The Yugoslav Airlines flight, a DC-9, was en route from Stockholm to Belgrade with a stopover in Copenhagen. During its approach to Zagreb, Croatia, an explosion occurred mid-flight, causing the plane to break apart in the air. All 28 passengers and crew members were killed, but the cause of the explosion remained a mystery for years. The investigation initially pointed to a bomb as the likely cause of the explosion, but there was no clear evidence of that as a terrorist attack, and further inquiry suggested a possible internal sabotage by a passenger, though no suspects were conclusively identified. There were also theories about mechanical failure or a failed hijacking attempt. In the years following the crash, conspiracy theories flourished, and the true cause of the explosion on JAT Flight 367 remained unsolved. Jeff Davis 8. The Jeff Davis 8 refers to a series of unsolved murders of 8 women in Jeff Davis Parish, Louisiana, between 2005 and 2009. The victims, mostly S-workers and drug users, were found in remote rural areas, often along highways or near oil fields. The bodies were typically left in or around swamps with signs of violent assault, strangulation, or blunt force trauma. The cases drew national attention due to their similarities and the community's suspicion that the murders were committed by a single killer. Despite investigations, the killer was never caught, and the case became notorious for the lack of significant leads. Many residents and investigators speculated that local law enforcement may have been involved or that the killer had connections within the community, which hindered the investigation. The deaths were initially treated as isolated incidents, but the discovery of multiple bodies led to the conclusion that a serial killer might be at work. To this day, the Jeff Davis 8 murders remain unsolved, and the cases continue to be a chilling reminder of the dangers faced by vulnerable communities. Myoho 56 Fire. The Myoho 56 fire occurred on May 9, 2001 in the Myoho 56 restaurant in the Ekaburo district of Tokyo, Japan. A devastating arson attack resulted in the deaths of 44 people and left dozens more injured. The fire began in a small, crowded restaurant where a number of young workers were all gathered. The building, which housed a bar and a nightclub, lacked proper fire exits and safety measures, contributing to the rapid spread of the flames and trapping many people inside. Investigators determined that the fire was deliberately set, though the exact motive behind the arson remains unclear. And while some speculated that it was related to business rivalries or some sort of revenge, no suspects were arrested immediately, and the case remained shrouded in mystery for some time. Wednesday Strangler. The Wednesday Strangler refers to an unidentified serial killer. The killer earned this nickname due to the pattern of the attacks occurring on, what you'd guess, Wednesdays, between 1981 and 1983. Several different women were found strangled with no visible signs of other physical trauma, and most of the victims were women involved in S-work or vulnerable individuals living in unstable conditions, which led to speculation that the killer targeted marginalized groups. And despite a number of investigations, the case remained unsolved, and the killer's method of strangulation and the timing of the attack suggested a pattern, but there were no witnesses or clear leads to help identify the suspect. Police considered the possibility of a serial killer but struggled to link all the victims definitively, and the Wednesday Strangler was never caught. Redhead Murders. The Redhead Murders is a term used to describe a series of unsolved murders involving young women with red hair, discovered in the Appalachian region of the United States between the 80s and early 90s. Between 1983 and 1990, at least 6 women were found dead in remote areas of the Appalachian Mountains, spanning from Tennessee to Arkansas, with signs that they had been strangled or suffocated. The victims were often left in isolated areas, and their identities unknown for some time, and their deaths showed signs of being carefully staged. The victims' red hair became a defining characteristic in linking the cases, though investigators were never able to confirm a common suspect. Many of the women were described as vulnerable, possibly S-workers or just drifters, and there was speculation about whether the killer was targeting these types of women or it was kind of just by chance. But despite ongoing investigations and public interest, the Redhead murders remain unsolved, with just no clear answer as to who committed the killings or why they targeted women with red hair. C-Lab 3 Sabotage. The C-Lab 3 sabotage refers to the mysterious events surrounding the U.S. Navy's C-Lab 3, an experimental underwater habitat located off the coast of California, which was involved in an infamous incident of sabotage in the 60s. C-Lab 3 was designed as part of a program to study underwater living and to prepare for future underwater missions. And in 1969, during an operation at C-Lab 3, the crew began experiencing equipment malfunctions, and some suspected some sort of sabotage, though no one could definitively explain the cause. The key incident occurred when a critical air compressor failed, compromising the habitat's oxygen supply. Although investigations were conducted, the specific cause of the failure remained uncertain. Some believed it was sabotage by a disgruntled team member, possibly connected to tensions between the Navy and the contractors who managed the project, or it could have been some sort of accident, but no one knows, because there's no solid evidence ever linked to a single person to the event. The sabotage theory persists among some, but due to the classified nature of many Sea Lab missions, details remain scarce, leaving the incident as one of the many unsolved mysteries in military and scientific history. Frankfurt Slasher. The Frankfurt Slasher is the name given to an unidentified serial killer who terrorized the Frankfurt neighborhood of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the late 1980s and early 1990s, between 1985 and 1990. Several women, primarily prostitutes and drug users, were found brutally attacked and slashed with sharp objects, often on the streets in the late hours of the night. The killer's method was typically slashing the victims' throats or bodies before fleeing the scene, leaving behind very few clues. Despite multiple investigations by the police and media coverage of the case, the identity of the Frankfurt Slasher remained elusive. And over time, the killing slowly stopped. And by the early 1990s, the attacks just completely stopped. But the case was never officially closed. Many theories have circulated, including the possibility that the killer was a local resident familiar with the area, or that there were multiple individuals involved in the slayings, but no one really knows because he got away. Crawford Killer. The Crawford Killer refers to an unidentified serial killer believed to have been active in the early 1980s in Crawford County, Pennsylvania, between 1982 and 1984. Several different women were found dead in rural or wooded areas, each showing signs of some sort of violent assault and strangulation. The killings were linked by the similar nature of the victims, young, vulnerable women, and despite the efforts of local law enforcement and national media attention, the case was never solved. Investigators considered various theories, including the possibility of a serial killer who targeted women in secluded areas, but no definitive suspects were ever identified. And the lack of any sort of physical evidence or clear leads contributed to the mystery surrounding the Crawford Killer, and the case eventually went cold. Chen family assassination. The Chen family assassination refers to a violent and mysterious mass killing that took place in 2001 in Taiwan. The Chen family, a wealthy and influential family, was brutally murdered in their home in Taipei. The attack was especially shocking due to its precision and the fact that all family members, 6 people in total, including the elderly parents and their children, were all killed in a very coordinated manner. The perpetrators seemed to have detailed knowledge of the family's routine and house layout, suggesting premeditation and that they planned this out. And the family was shot and stabbed, and the crime scene was described as just horrific. At first, there were suspicions of a robbery gone wrong, but investigators soon believed the murders were part of a more complex scheme. There were theories about business disputes, revenge, and even possible ties to organized crime, but no clear motive or suspect emerged. Wilkinsburg shooting. The Wilkinsburg shooting refers to a mass shooting that took place on March 9, 2016 in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Pittsburgh. During a backyard barbecue at a duplex, a gunman opened fire, killing 6 people and injuring 3 others. The victims, including a pregnant woman, were all sitting on the porch when they were shot at close range, with the attacker firing multiple rounds from an assault rifle. The case immediately drew attention due to the severity of the attack and the number of victims involved. Investigators initially believed that they were shooting was targeted, possibly connected to some sort of drug-related activity or gang violence, but no definitive motive was identified. But despite extensive investigations and different appeals from law enforcement for information, the case remained unsolved for several years. But in 2017, a suspect identified as 28-year-old Keith D. Herring was arrested in connection with the shooting. However, doubts still remain about whether he was the sole perpetrator, and some believe there may have been other individuals involved. As of now, the Wilkinsburg shooting is considered an unresolved case in terms of full clarity on the motive and all parties responsible. Murder of Anthony Liu. The murder of Anthony Liu is a mysterious and tragic case that took place in 2006 in the United States. Anthony Liu, a 24-year-old man, was found dead in his apartment in San Francisco, California. His death was initially ruled a homicide, but the circumstances surrounding the case have remained just unclear. Anthony's body was discovered after a concerned friend requested a welfare check due to his sudden lack of communication. He had been brutally stabbed multiple times. Despite an extensive investigation, police were unable to immediately identify a clear motive or suspect in the case. Theories surrounding Anthony's death include a possible robbery gone wrong, a personal dispute, or even a crime of passion, but no definitive answers were ever found. And the case has remained unsolved for years, with the family and friends of Anthony Liu continuing to seek some sort of justice. Investigators have faced challenges in uncovering the truth, partially due to a lack of witnesses and physical evidence linking any individuals to the crime. And as of now, the murder of Anthony Liu remains one of San Francisco's unsolved and haunting mysteries. Tier 5. 4chan Crystals. The 4chan Crystals is a term that refers to an ongoing internet mystery connected to a cryptic post on 4chan, an online message board. In 2018, a user on 4chan's X board dedicated to paranormal and conspiracy topics shared a post about a set of mysterious glowing crystals that the poster claimed to have found. The crystals, which were described as having strange otherworldly properties, were reportedly acquired from an unknown source and were said to emit a strange light or energy when exposed to certain conditions. The original post and subsequent discussions sparked a flurry of speculation, with users debating whether the crystals were part of an elaborate hoax or connected to paranormal phenomena. Some believe the crystals might be linked to UFO sightings, while others suggested they could be part of a more secretive scientific experiment or artifact from an undiscovered source. But despite the viral nature of the post, no verifiable evidence has surfaced regarding the crystals, and the original poster never revealed their identity. And subsequent attempts to find more information or obtain the crystals have all been unsuccessful. And the 4chan crystals remain an unsolved mystery in internet lore. Arizona Ghost Radio. Arizona Ghost Radio refers to a mysterious phenomenon that occurred in the 1990s involving a radio broadcast in Arizona that many believed was linked to paranormal activity. The incident started when a man tuning into a local radio station in the state began hearing strange, distorted voices and static interruptions. However, it wasn't just the usual radio interference. The voices seemed to have a pattern and were speaking in a cryptic, unintelligible manner. And over time, listeners reported that the station's broadcast seemed to intermittently feature strange messages, often with mentions of ghostly figures, cryptic warnings, and even distorted recordings of past events that seemed to have no connection to the station's normal programming. Some listeners speculated that the broadcast might be a result of a haunted radio frequency, while others believed it was the result of someone deliberately manipulating the broadcast with eerie content, trying to scare people. But despite numerous investigations, no clear explanation has ever been found regarding the radio station. And the radio station denied any sort of connection to the strange transmissions, and technical investigations revealed nothing out of the ordinary with the station's equipment. And as a result, Arizona Ghost Radio remains a mysterious event, with some considering it an urban legend tied to unexplained paranormal phenomena. Shrek Defecator. Man, that's one hell of a name. But the Shrek Defecator is an internet mystery that gained attention through a bizarre and unsettling urban legend surrounding a supposed video involving a person dressed as the character Shrek from the popular animated movie. And according to the legend, the video showed someone in full Shrek costume performing a grotesque act which involved defecating in a public place. The video was allegedly shared on forums, including 4chan, and became notorious due to its shocking and disturbing nature. And details surrounding the video are vague, and there are no verifiable sources to confirm its existence, making it part of the larger internet folklore where myths and urban legends often blend with real-life events. Some believe it was a hoax created for shock value, while others speculate it was an example of shock content that internet communities sometimes engage in to gain attention or provoke reactions. And the Shrek Defecator case remains an unsolved mystery in the realm of internet urban legends, as the video's authenticity has never been proven. The Bodom Lake 3. The Bodom Lake 3 refers to a notorious unsolved murder case that took place in Finland in 1960, known as the Bodom Lake Murders. On June 4th of that year, 3 teenagers, 2 girls, Anja Tomine and Raja Lisa, and 1 boy, Matti Röntgen, went camping by Lake Bodom, near the town of Espoo, Finland. Sometime during the night, they were brutally attacked by an unknown assailant. The boy and 1 of the girls were found dead, and the other girl was severely injured but survived the attack. The case became infamous for its mysterious nature. The only survivor, the second girl, was unable to provide a clear description of the killer, leading to a myriad of theories and suspects. Several men were arrested and investigated over the years, but no one was ever definitively charged with the crime. Speculation over motives have ranged from personal grudges to random attacks by a stranger, and in the decades since the murders, the Bodom Lake 3 case has remained one of Finland's most chilling unsolved mystery. Veracruz Cats. The Veracruz Cats is a term associated with an unsolved mystery in Veracruz, Mexico, in the early 2000s, involving a series of strange and disturbing incidents. Over several months, reports emerged of people in the region encountering unusual feline-like creatures, described as large, aggressive cats with features that didn't match known species. Witnesses claimed to have seen the animals in various areas of Veracruz, often behaving in an odd or unnatural manner. The phenomenon gained media attention as more sightings were reported, and local authorities were unable to provide an explanation. Some suggested that the creatures were a result of illegal animal trafficking or experimentation, while others speculated about paranormal or cryptid explanations. The creatures were described as much larger than typical wild cats, with some even saying they appeared to be part human, though no physical evidence or photographs were ever produced. Gary Newman Stalker. The Gary Newman Stalker refers to an unsettling internet mystery tied to Gary Newman, the British video game developer best known for creating the popular game Garry's Mod in 2011. Newman became the subject of strange, threatening behavior by an individual claiming to be a stalker. This person reportedly started harassing him and his family online, sending disturbing messages, making vague threats, and attempting to gather personal information about his life. The stalker's behavior escalated over time, with claims that they had been following Newman for years, even showing up at public events where he was scheduled to appear. Some of the stalker's messages alluded to a deep obsession with Newman and his games, though the motivations behind the harassment remain unclear. And despite numerous attempts to contact law enforcement, the stalker's identity and whereabouts were never confirmed, and the situation seemed to eventually quiet down without any sort of resolution. Upstairs Lounge Fire. The Upstairs Lounge Fire refers to a tragic event that occurred on June 24, 1973 in New Orleans, Louisiana. The fire broke out in the Upstairs Lounge, a gay bar located on Chartres Street in the French Quarter, and claimed the lives of 32 people. The fire was deliberately set, and the suspect was believed to be a disgruntled former patron, though the exact motive remains unclear. At the time, the Upstairs Lounge was a popular gathering place for the local LGBTQ+ community. The fire started in a rear stairwell, blocking escape routes and trapping those inside. And as the blaze spread, the bar quickly became engulfed in flames. Many victims were unable to escape, and the fire resulted in one of the deadliest incidents involving the LGBTQ+ community in American history. And despite numerous theories, including revenge or targeted hate, the person responsible for this fire was never officially apprehended. LAX Unknown Jetpack Man. The LAX Unknown Jetpack Man refers to a series of mysterious sightings in 2020 and 2021 near Los Angeles International Airport, otherwise known as LAX, of a person reportedly flying through the air using a jetpack. The first reported incident occurred in August 2020, when airline pilots reported seeing a man flying at an altitude of around 3,000 feet while approaching the airport. Further sightings continued in the months that followed, including additional pilot reports and even a police helicopter spotting a jetpack man. Despite multiple investigations by the Federal Aviation Administration, the FBI, and local authorities, no evidence has ever been found to identify the individual or explain the technology behind these sightings. Some experts have suggested that the sightings could be hoaxes, or that the person was using a sophisticated drone or device designed to look like a jetpack, and the identity of the Jetpack Man remains a mystery. Brandon Swanson. The case of Brandon Swanson is a tragic and mysterious disappearance that occurred on May 14, 2008 in rural Minnesota. Brandon, a 19-year-old college student, was driving home when he accidentally drove his car into a ditch on a remote road near the town of Lind. After calling his parents for help, he told them he was okay but was unsure of his exact location. He believed he could walk to a nearby town, and his parents advised him to stay on the phone while they tried to reach him. As the conversation continued, Brandon's parents heard him suddenly explain, "Oh shit," before the call abruptly cut off. Despite extensive efforts by his family, authorities, and volunteers, Brandon was never found. The area where his car was located was thoroughly searched, but no trace of him was discovered, and there were no significant clues to explain his disappearance. The case remains unsolved, and the theories surrounding Brandon's disappearance are numerous. Some suggested that he may have been disoriented due to the isolation, while others believed he may have been a victim of foul play. Helios 552. The Helios 552 refers to the tragic crash of Helios Airways Flight 552, which occurred on August 14, 2005. The flight, a Boeing 737-300, was en route from Larkana, Cyprus to Athens, Greece, when it crashed into a mountain near Grammatiko, just north of Athens, killing all 121 people on board. The crash was caused by a combination of technical failures and human error, but what makes this case especially mysterious and unsettling is the sequence of events that led to the disaster. In the moments before the crash, the plane was in autopilot mode and began descending uncontrollably. Investigators later determined that a critical failure occurred in the oxygen system, likely leaving the pilots and passengers unconscious. The aircraft's autopilot continued to function while the plane drifted off course. The lack of response from the cockpit crew and the fact that the plane did not issue a distress signal raised questions about the passenger's state of consciousness and whether the crew was able to intervene in time. The crash was eventually attributed to the malfunctioning pressurization system, which caused a loss of cabin pressure, resulting in hypoxia, which is oxygen deprivation for those aboard. Despite the technical findings, the exact causes and chain of events that led to the tragedy remain subject of debate and investigation. Lisa McPherson. Lisa McPherson was a 36-year-old woman who died under mysterious circumstances in 1995 after spending 17 days in the care of the Church of Scientology. McPherson had been a long-time member of the church and was reportedly involved in a car accident on November 18, 1995 in Clearwater, Florida. After the accident, she exhibited unusual behavior, which led church members to take her to the church's headquarters instead of seeking immediate medical care. And during her time at the church, McPherson was reportedly kept in isolation and under the supervision of church staff. She was not taken to a hospital under her condition had worsened significantly. On December 5, 1995, McPherson was found unconscious and unresponsive. She was rushed to a local hospital, but she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. An autopsy revealed that she had died of a pulmonary embolism, but it also showed signs of dehydration, malnutrition, and bruising, leading to suspicions of neglect and abuse. The circumstances of McPherson's death have sparked ongoing controversy and legal battles, and the Church of Scientology has denied any wrongdoing, claiming that McPherson had received care consistent with their religious practices. However, several former members and critics of the church have pointed to the church's secretive practices and the lack of medical care provided to McPherson as a factor in her tragic death. And the case remains unsolved, and while criminal charges were filed against the church, they were eventually dropped. The Family Murders. The Family Murders refer to a series of unsolved killings in Adelaide, Australia between 1979 and 1983. At least 5 young men were abducted, tortured, and murdered, and the victims were often found in remote areas, and the crime showed signs of sadistic and ritualistic behavior. The murders were linked by a common theme of the victims' social isolation, and they were all vulnerable in some way, such as being homeless or involved in the LGBTQ+ community. And the term family comes from the nickname given to a suspected group rumored to be involved in the ritualistic practices. But despite several investigations and suspects, including potential links to local crime figures, the case remains open and unsolved. The Springfield Three. The Springfield 3 refers to the mysterious disappearance of two teenage girls, Stacey McCall and Susanna Susie Streeter, and Susie's mother, Cheryl Levitt, from their home in Springfield, Missouri, on June 7, 1992. The women were last seen at around 11:15 p.m. when Susie and Stacey dropped by Cheryl's house after a night out. The next morning, the house was found eerily undisturbed and no signs of forced entry, but the women were gone. And the case has raised numerous theories, including a potential abduction, a botched robbery, or even a link to local crime figures that are around the area or were notorious. But despite extensive investigation, no evidence has ever emerged, and the case remains unsolved. Pakistan Four Bodies Pit. The Pakistan Four Bodies Pit refers to the discovery of four bodies in a mass grave in the early 2000s in a rural area of Pakistan's Punjab province. The victims, believed to be from a minority group, had been all brutally murdered and buried in a pit. The case attracted significant attention due to the mysterious circumstances surrounding their deaths and the lack of a clear motive. While some speculated that the killings were related to a political or religious conflict, others believed the murders were linked to human trafficking or organized crime. Despite various investigations, the case remains unsolved, and the true identity of the perpetrators or the person and the reason for the killings are still unknown. Sherry Jarvis. Sherry Jarvis was a woman from the United States who went missing in 1983 under mysterious circumstances. She was last seen in Klamath Falls, Oregon, leaving a friend's house, but never returned home. Her car was found abandoned, with no signs of struggle or indication of what happened to her. Over the years, various theories have emerged, including the possibility of abduction or voluntary disappearance, and that is one of the main probabilities. People think she just wanted to disappear, but no one knows. And despite efforts by law enforcement and private investigators hired by the family, Sherry's case remains unsolved, and her fate will most likely be unknown about 4 decades later. Lisboa Ripper. The Lisboa Ripper refers to an unidentified serial killer responsible for a series of brutal murders in Lisbon, Portugal. During the 1990s, between 1992 and 1993, several women were all found murdered with similar patterns of mutilation and violence, which kind of got the police thinking there was a serial killer because they were all kind of found similarly killed. And the victims were typically workers, and their bodies were discovered in secluded areas, often showing signs of torture before death. The case gained widespread attention due to the grisly nature of the crimes and the apparent connection between the victims. But despite numerous investigations, the Lisboa Ripper's identity still remains unknown, and the case has never been officially solved. Connecticut River Bodies. The Connecticut River Bodies refers to the discovery of several different bodies found in the Connecticut River, which flows through New England in the early 2000s. The first body was found in 2003, and subsequent remains were discovered over the next few years. The victims, all young women, appeared to have been murdered before being dumped into the river, and their deaths showed signs of obvious foul play. Speculation grew that the murders could be linked to a serial killer in one person, but despite efforts to investigate and numerous suspects, no conclusive links were ever established, and the case remains unsolved, and the identity of the killer or killers and the true motive behind the deaths continue to elude authorities. The Sims family. 4 members of the Sims family were found murdered in their home in San Diego, California. The victims included parents William and Linda Sims and their 2 children, 12-year-old son and 9-year-old daughter. The family was discovered in a gruesome state with obvious signs of a violent struggle. The crime scene suggested a targeted attack, yet there were no obvious motives. Despite several leads and potential suspects, including a possible connection to Williams' business dealings, the case remains unsolved, and the brutal nature of the killings and a lack of clear answers have kept the mystery of the Sims family murders alive for decades. Atlas Vampire. The Atlas Vampire refers to an unsolved mystery surrounding a series of murders in Stockholm, Sweden in 1932. The first victim, a woman named Frida, was found brutally murdered in her apartment with signs of severe blood loss. The unusual nature of the crime, her body showed evidence that the killer drank her blood, led to rumors that a vampire-like figure was on the loose. And this is obviously horrifically disturbing. The killer was dubbed the Atlas Vampire after a gruesome crime scene was found in the Atlas area of Stockholm. But despite extensive investigations and a few suspects, the killer was never caught and the murders remain unsolved. And the case is often cited as one of the most bizarre in Swedish criminal history, but even in my opinion, this is one of the weirdest that I've read so far in this Iceberg. I mean, drank her blood. That's crazy. Tier 6, USA Sonic Attacks. The USA Sonic attack refers to a series of unexplained health incidents that affected US diplomats and spies in Cuba, beginning in late 2016. Several individuals reported hearing strange, high-pitched sounds, followed by symptoms such as hearing loss, headaches, dizziness, and cognitive issues. This led to a speculation that the diplomats were targeted by a sonic attack using a directed energy weapon. The incidents were officially described as Havana Syndrome, and similar cases were later reported in China and other surrounding countries. Despite investigations by the US government and independent experts, no clear cause has ever been identified, and theories range from sonic weapons to mass psychogenic illness. And the true nature of the attacks and the perpetrators behind them remain unsolved, leaving the case a mysterious and ongoing puzzle. Frog Kids. 2 young children, a brother and a sister, were reported missing after playing in a local park. Days later, their bodies were discovered in a remote area, but something strange was found at the scene. The children had been surrounded by hundreds of dead frogs. Some witnesses reported seeing odd figures in the area before the disappearance, sparking theories about ritualistic activity, environmental contamination, or even supernatural involvement. But despite multiple investigations, the exact cause of their deaths remain unclear, and the bizarre details of the case, especially the presence of the frogs, have led to widespread speculation, but no answers have emerged, leaving the Frog Kids mystery unsolved. Freeway 145. Freeway 145 refers to a chilling, unsolved mystery involving a series of mysterious disappearances and deaths along California's Highway 145, a remote stretch of road in the Central Valley. Between 1998 and 2003, several different motorists were reported missing after driving along the highway, with some bodies eventually discovered in nearby fields or along the roadside. Each of the victims appeared to have been involved in car accidents or left stranded in some way, but investigators found strange inconsistencies in the evidence, leading to possibility of foul play. Theories emerged ranging from a serial killer targeting travelers to a hidden criminal network operating along the freeway. But despite numerous investigations, the true cause behind these deaths still remains unknown. Annecy Attacks. The Annecy attacks refer to a brutal double murder that took place in September 2012 in the French Alps near the town of Annecy. The victims were a British family, a couple, Saad al-Hili and his wife, along with Saad's mother-in-law, who were found shot dead inside their car. And their 2 daughters, aged 4 and 7, were also attacked, but the younger girl survived, and the older girl was left critically injured. The case shocked the world as the crime appeared to be random and without motive. Investigators considered multiple theories, including potential ties to Saad's work in the aerospace industry or personal disputes. The 7 from Santa Rose. The 7 from Santa Rosa refers to a series of unsolved disappearances and deaths that occurred in Santa Rosa, California during the late 1990s and early 2000s. 7 young people, ranging in age from 18 to 24, vanished under strange circumstances, with little evidence left behind. The cases, all involving individuals who were last seen in or around Santa Rosa, were initially believed to be just unrelated. However, as the disappearances continued over time, investigators began to suspect a potential serial connection. Some theories pointed to drug trafficking or human trafficking networks operating in the area. But despite several leads, including a few suspects and links to other missing persons, no arrests were made, and the cases remain open. The Waltham 3. The Waltham 3 refers to the brutal unsolved murders of 3 young men, Brendan Mess, Eric Weissman, and Raphael Tekin, on September 11, 2011, in Waltham, Massachusetts. The victims were found in a small apartment with their throats slit, and the crime scene showed evidence of extreme violence. Marijuana and cash were scattered around the bodies, suggesting a targeted and symbolic attack. Initially, investigators suspected a drug-related motive, but no clear leads emerged. Years later, attention returned to the case when Tamerlan Tzernev, one of the perpetrators of the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing, was linked to the murders through circumstantial evidence and alleged confessions. However, with Tzernev deceased, no formal charges were made, and the case remains officially unsolved. Newtown Country John Does. In Newtown, Connecticut, the discovery of two unidentified bodies in 1978 left the small community puzzled. The bodies, one male and one female, were found in a wooded area off Route 25. Both individuals were believed to be in their 20s, but their identities and the circumstances surrounding their deaths remain a mystery. Investigators determined that the victims had been dead for several months before their discovery, and the cause of death was deemed suspicious, though specifics were never confirmed publicly. Neither carried identification, and despite sketches and reconstructions being circulated, no matches were made. The case grew colder with time as leads dried up and no one came forward with connections to the deceased. Decades later, the Newtown John and Jane Doe continues to be a haunting reminder of lives lost without names or closure. Telephone bar deaths. The telephone bar deaths refer to the mysterious deaths of two individuals in 1998 at the telephone bar in New York City. The victims, both in their late 20s, were found dead in the bar's restroom under strange circumstances. There were no signs of struggle or obvious trauma, but both appeared to have died from poisoning. Witnesses recalled seeing the pair drinking with the other patrons, but no one saw anything unusual. Toxicology reports showed high levels of a rare substance, though its origin couldn't be traced. Speculation arose about a targeted attack, possibly involving someone close to the victim, but no suspects were ever named. West Fertilizer Explosion. The West Fertilizer Explosion occurred on April 17, 2013 in West Texas, when a fertilizer plant exploded, killing at least 15 people and injuring over 160 others. The blast was one of the deadliest industrial accidents in U.S. history, leveled much of the surrounding neighborhood, and caused widespread damage to homes and buildings. The cause of the explosion was believed to be the ignition of ammonium nitrate, a highly explosive substance used in fertilizers, which had been improperly stored. However, despite extensive investigations by local, state, and federal authorities, the exact cause of the fire that sparked the explosion was never determined. The fertilizer plant had a history of safety violations, but no one was ever charged or held accountable for the disaster. The West Fertilizer Explosion remains a haunting reminder of the potential dangers of industrial chemicals and the lack of regulations surrounding their storage. Chicago Tylenol attack. The Chicago Tylenol murders in 1982 involved the deaths of 7 people who ingested cyanide-laced Tylenol capsules. The victims, ranging in age from 12 to 35, died after taking the pain reliever, leading to widespread panic. The case prompted a nationwide recall of Tylenol, affecting millions of bottles. Despite an extensive investigation, including thousands of interviews and testing, the killer was never caught, and the cyanide had been added to the bottles on the store shelves, suggesting the work of a random killer or someone with access to the distribution chain. Several suspects were considered over the years, but none were linked to the crime. The case remains unsolved, and the Chicago Tylenol murders continue to be one of the most infamous unsolved poisoning cases in U.S. history, leading to changes in packaging regulations for over-the-counter medications. Robert Fisher. Robert Fisher is one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives, wanted for the murder of his wife and 2 children in Scottsdale, Arizona in 2001. After allegedly killing his family, Fisher set their house on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence, but the fire exposed the brutal crime. The victims had been shot, and Fisher's wife was also found with a gunshot wound to the head. Fisher disappeared shortly after the killings, and despite extensive searches, he has never been found. His case remains unsolved, with theories suggesting he could be living under an alias, possibly overseas, due to his knowledge of survival tactics and his background as a former military-trained medic. Fisher's face remains one of the most recognizable on FBI wanted posters, with numerous sightings reported over the years, but none confirmed. A6 Killer. The A6 Killer is the name given to an unidentified serial killer linked to a series of murders along the A6 road in England, primarily during the 1970s. The killer's first known victim, 25-year-old Teresa De Simone, was found dead in 1975, her body abandoned near the highway. And over the following years, several other women were found dead under similar circumstances, often showing signs of SA and strangulation. And despite efforts from law enforcement, including a significant police investigation, the A6 killer was never caught. Some believe the killer may have been a truck driver who used the A6 as a regular route, which gave rise to theories that the killer selected victims from truck stops or rest areas. And the case remains unsolved, and the killer's identity has remained a mystery for decades. Gayland Baru family murders. The Gayland Baru family murders occurred in 2008 in Singapore and involved the brutal killing of a family of four. The victims, a mother, father, and their two children, were found murdered in their apartment in the Gayland Baru district. All four had been stabbed multiple times, and the scene was gruesome, showing signs of a violent struggle. Initially, the police were stumped as there appeared to be no clear motive for the attack. There were no signs of forced entry, leading authorities to suspect that the killer may have been someone known to the family. However, despite an extensive investigation and numerous leads, the case went cold. In the years following the murders, theories ranged from a robbery gone wrong to a personal vendetta, but no one was ever arrested or charged. Jesse McBain and Patricia Mann murders. The murders of Jesse McBain and Patricia Mann in 1987 are a chilling unsolved mystery. The couple, who had been dating for several years, was found dead in a secluded area of North Carolina. McBain, who was 30, a former military man, and Mann, who was 28, a former beauty queen, were shot execution style, and their bodies were left near a dirt road. There were no signs of struggle or robbery, which led investigators to believe that the victims knew their killer or were targeted for reasons beyond random violence. The couple's car was also found nearby, indicating they had been ambushed after leaving a party. Multiple theories have been proposed over the years, including the involvement of a jealous lover or a professional hitman, but no solid leads have emerged. Alright, let's get into tier 7, and since you're 2 hours into this video already, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I mean, you've enjoyed the video enough to watch 2 hours in, so please subscribe if you aren't already. And anyways, let's get into tier 7, and the first entry being Toronto Intoxicated Babies. The Toronto Intoxicated Babies incident refers to a disturbing case in 1999 when a group of babies was found to have been intentionally given alcohol, resulting in severe intoxication. The babies, all under the age of 2, were discovered in a Toronto daycare center. Authorities were alerted after several parents reported strange behavior in their children, including unresponsiveness and erratic movements. An investigation revealed that the daycare workers had been deliberately adding alcohol to the children's food and drink, possibly as a form of control or for malicious amusement. The authorities were shocked by the depravity of the crime, which was seen as an extreme form of child abuse. The workers involved were arrested and charged, but the case raised broader concerns about the safety and regulation of daycare centers in the area. Though the perpetrators were convicted, the case remains a chilling reminder of the potential for abuse in trusted environments. And I'm not sure why this is an unsolved mystery, but I just went and covered it anyways. The 1979 Luna Park Ghost Train Fire, Sydney. The 1979 Luna Park Ghost Train Fire in Sydney remains one of Australia's most tragic and mysterious events. On the night of June 9th, a fire broke out in the ghost train ride at Luna Park, an iconic amusement park. The blaze quickly engulfed the ride, trapping several people inside. In total, 7 young people aged 14 to 35 lost their lives in the fire. Initial investigation suggested that the fire may have been started intentionally, but the exact cause was never confirmed. Several theories have emerged over the years, including the possibility of arson, but no one was ever charged with the crime. The ride itself has experienced maintenance issues before the fire, leading to speculation that poor safety protocols could have contributed to the fire, but despite the passage of time and various attempts to uncover the truth, the case remains unsolved, and the families of the victims still seek closure. Tristan Brubach. Tristan Brubach was a 22-year-old Australian man whose mysterious death in 1994 remains unsolved. Brubach's body was found in the early hours of October 3, 1994, on the side of the road in the Blue Mountains near Sydney. He had suffered severe head injuries, and there were no signs of a struggle or some sort of theft, but leading investigators to believe he had been attacked in a seemingly random act of violence. And one of the most chilling aspects of the case is that Brubach's death came shortly after a number of similar unsolved assaults and murders in the same area. Authorities initially thought the case might be linked to a serial killer, though no concrete connections were found. And over the years, numerous theories have surfaced, including the possibility of a botched robbery or a connection to a larger crime ring, but no one was ever charged with the murder. Oklahoma Kid Scouts. The Oklahoma Kid Scouts refers to an unsolved mystery involving a young boy and a group of scouts in the 1950s in Oklahoma. The case centers on the disappearance of a 12-year-old boy known as the Oklahoma Kid during a scouting trip in the summer of 1953. The boy, along with a group of scouts, was hiking in the woods near the small town of Broken Arrow when he mysteriously vanished without a trace. Despite an extensive search by local authorities and his scout leaders, no clues were found as to the boy's whereabouts. His disappearance was particularly eerie because it occurred during broad daylight and in an area that had already been cleared multiple times. Speculation ranged from the boy being lost to being kidnapped or being falling victim to a criminal act. And over the years, new leads have surfaced, but none have led to a solid resolution. Walker family murders. The Walker family murders occurred in 1959 in Osprey, Florida, when a family of 4 was brutally murdered in their home. The victims were 49-year-old John Walker, his wife, 46-year-old Minnie, and their 2 children, 16-year-old Jean and 12-year-old Judy. All 4 family members were shot to death in what appeared to be a targeted attack, though nothing was stolen from the house, and the case remained a mystery for years, with several different theories emerging, including the possibility of a personal vendetta against the family or a robbery gone wrong, but then again, nothing was stolen, so it couldn't have been a robbery gone wrong. But despite investigations and numerous suspects, no motive was ever determined, and in the early years of the investigation, police received tips pointing to a former neighbor and a local criminal, but no evidence could be linked him to the crime. The Walker family murders remain unsolved, and the true identity of the killer or killers continues to elude authorities. Man in the Cane. The Man in the Cane refers to an eerie, unsolved mystery that emerged in 1952 in the swamps of Louisiana. A man's body was discovered deep within a cane field in an area known for its difficult terrain. The man, who appeared to be in his mid-30s, was found dressed in a suit, but he had no identification and his clothes showed signs of unusual wear, as if he had been trapped in the field for a long period. The most perplexing aspect was that the man's body showed no signs of struggle or injury, leaving authorities to believe that he may have been placed there after death. There were no clear answers or to how he ended up in such a remote location, nor who he was, and various theories have arisen over the years, from the possibility of a failed escape attempt to speculation that the man could have been the victim of a murder or some sort of foul play. Mad Pooper. The Mad Pooper is a nickname given to an unidentified woman who is known for defecating in public places while jogging in Colorado Springs, Colorado. In 2017, over a span of several weeks, the woman repeatedly relieved herself on residents' lawns and in public areas, seemingly without concern for who might be watching. Witnesses described her as a woman in her 30s or 40s, often wearing athletic gear and jogging at a steady pace before abruptly stopping to squat in front of homes or businesses. Local residents were initially shocked, but as the incidents continued, they grew increasingly frustrated. The case garnered media attention, with police working to identify the Mad Pooper based on surveillance footage and witness depictions. Despite several leads, the woman was never caught. Alphabetic Killer. The Alphabetic Killer is the nickname given to an unidentified serial killer who is believed to have committed a series of murders in the 90s, primarily in the United States. The killer's distinctive pattern involved targeting victims whose names corresponded to letters of the alphabet. The victims' first and last names were thought to match a specific letter sequence, and the murders occurred in alphabetical order, with each victim's name being the next in line. Details of the crimes were chilling. The victims, often young women, were found with strange symbols or letters written near their bodies, leading investigators to believe the killer was leaving clues. However, the pattern was never definitively confirmed, and no solid evidence ever connected the murders beyond the alphabetical theory. Despite a prolonged investigation and several suspects being considered, no one was ever arrested or charged. Freeway Ghost. The Freeway Ghost is the name given to an unidentified figure involved in a series of strange and haunting encounters along freeways in Southern California during the late 1990s. Drivers began reporting seeing a ghostly figure on or near highways, often at night, appearing as a woman in white or a silhouette standing on the roadside. The encounters were consistent, with the figure seemingly vanishing when approached or when cars slowed down. One of the most famous incidents occurred in 1999 when a driver stopped to help what appeared to be a stranded motorist on the shoulder of the freeway. As the driver approached, the figure disappeared, leaving no trace of a vehicle or any physical presence behind. Other drivers have reported similar encounters, and in some cases, the figure was said to have interacted with the drivers before vanishing into thin air. The Freeway Ghost's true identity and origins remain a mystery, and some theories suggest it could be a spirit of a deceased person involved in a past accident, while others believe it may be an urban legend or a figment of collective imagination. Arthur Buddy Schumacher. Arthur Buddy Schumacher was a Texas man who disappeared in 1991. Schumacher, who is 34, was last seen leaving his job in Garland, Texas, and was reported missing shortly afterward. His vehicle was found abandoned, but there were no signs of foul play at the scene. The investigation into his disappearance yielded very few clues, and some speculate that Schumacher may have been involved in illegal activities or had personal conflicts that led to his vanishing. His case remains unsolved, and despite various efforts to uncover what happened to him, no answers have ever been found. Iran chain deaths. The Iran chain murders, which occurred between 1988 and 1998, involved a series of mysterious deaths of prominent Iranian intellectuals, writers, and political activists. These individuals were found murdered under suspicious circumstances, often showing signs of torture or execution. The Iranian government initially denied involvement, but it became clear that a covert operation, possibly by government-backed groups, was responsible. The murders are believed to have been politically motivated, targeting those who were critical of the regime. And despite widespread speculation and investigations, the true perpetrators remain unidentified, and the case continues to be a symbol of the dangers faced by those opposing the government in Iran. Manchester Pushes. The Manchester Pushes refer to a series of mysterious and unexplained incidents that occurred in Manchester, England in the early 2000s. Several individuals reported being violently pushed or shoved from behind by an unseen force, often near busy areas like streets or train stations. And victims described feeling a sudden, powerful shove that sent them tumbling forward, sometimes leading to injuries. Though some believed it was a prank or random acts of aggression, others speculated that a more sinister explanation existed. But despite investigations and a few similar cases in other cities, the true cause of the pushes has never been determined. I-65 deaths. The I-65 deaths refer to a series of unsolved murders along Interstate 65, a major highway in the United States. Especially in the 80s and 90s, the victims, mostly women, were found dead near rest areas or motels along the route, stretching through Indiana, Kentucky, and Alabama. The cases were connected due to the similar circumstances, with victims often being young women traveling alone or with minimal company. Despite numerous investigations, the killer or killers remains unidentified. Authorities initially believed the crimes were the work of a serial killer, but the mystery has persisted, with theories ranging from a lone criminal to a group acting together. Chinese Hinterkaifeck. The Chinese Hinterkaifeck is a term that has been used in reference to a series of mysterious murders in China, drawing comparisons to the infamous Hinterkaifeck murders in Germany. And we talked about that in, I think, Tier 1, so a while back, but hopefully you remember. But in both cases, families were brutally killed in isolated, rural settings, and the murders remain unsolved. The Chinese case, which occurred in the 90s, involved the massacre of a family living in a remote area of northeastern China. Similar to the Hinterkaifeck case, the killer seemed to have intimate knowledge of the victims and may have lingered on the property afterward. But despite several theories, including personal vendettas and organized crime involvement, no clear answers have emerged, leaving it an unresolved crime in Chinese criminal history. Adam. Adam is the name given to a mysterious case involving an unidentified boy found in a remote area of England. The boy, around 6 years old at the time, was discovered in a suitcase on the outskirts of the village of Somerton, near the famous Somerton Man case. The boy had no identification and his cause of death remained unexplained, and various theories have been suggested, including that he was a victim of a kidnapping or part of a covert operation, but no conclusive evidence has emerged to explain his identity or how he ended up in his suitcase. The case remains one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in British history. Dorothy Jane Scott. Dorothy Jane Scott was a 25-year-old woman who mysteriously disappeared in 1980 from Anaheim, California. After attending a work meeting, she vanished while driving a coworker home. The following day, her car was found abandoned, but there was no signs of Dorothy. For months, her mother received eerie phone calls from an anonymous man claiming to be responsible for Dorothy's abduction. In one of these calls, the man ominously described details only someone involved in her disappearance could know. And in 1984, Dorothy's remains were discovered in a remote area, but the identity of her abductor remains unknown, in just a very disturbing case. Mainline Killer. The Mainline Killer refers to a series of unsolved murders in the Philadelphia area, specifically along the Main Line, a suburban region. During the 90s, the victims were primarily young women, and their bodies were discovered in remote areas, often showing signs of SA and violent trauma. And despite investigations and suspect profiles, the case has remained unsolved. Authorities have speculated that the killer may have been a local resident familiar with the areas, but there have been no concrete evidence or arrest. And over the years, the Mainline Killer case has faded into obscurity, leaving a lingering sense of mystery and fear in the community. Harlem Gay Conversion Camp. The Harlem Gay Conversion Camp refers to a controversial and disturbing case in the early 2000s involving an underground group in Harlem, New York. The camp claimed to cure individuals of their homosexuality through extreme, often abusive methods such as forced therapy, physical punishments, and brainwashing techniques. The group operated secretly, obviously, and victims were often coerced into attending through manipulative tactics. Though the camp's existence was widely reported, investigations were hampered by a lack of evidence and witnesses, and the true extent of the operation remains unclear. Alright, let's get into Tier 8, the Rock Island Case. The Rock Island Case refers to a mysterious disappearance and murder investigation in Rock Island, Illinois in 1953. A young woman named Evelyn Hartley, who was 15, vanished while babysitting for a family in the area. Her body was discovered a few days later, showing signs of torture and SA. Investigators quickly determined that the crime was committed by someone familiar with the area, and there were reports of strange sightings near the Hartley house the night she went missing. And despite a series of suspects and widespread media attention, no one was ever charged, and the case remains unsolved. And over the years, theories have emerged about who the killer was, but the truth remains elusive. Ricky McCormick. Ricky McCormick was a 41-year-old man found dead in a field in St. Louis County, Missouri in 1999. His body was discovered about 20 miles from his home, and it was later determined that he had been murdered. What makes McCormick's case especially mysterious is the cryptic notes found in his pockets, written in a series of strange codes that have yet to be deciphered. Authorities believe these notes may provide a clue about his killer or the circumstances of his death, but despite multiple attempts to crack the code, it remains unsolved. North Kanto deaths. The North Kanto deaths refer to a series of mysterious deaths that occurred in the Kanto region of Japan, specifically between 1990 and 1995. Several young individuals were found dead under strange circumstances, often in rural or secluded areas. The victims showed signs of blunt force trauma, and some were left in poses suggesting ritualistic elements. Investigators were puzzled by the lack of any sort of clear motive, as many of the victims had no apparent connections to each other, and some theories suggested ties to organized crime or a possible cult, but no suspects were ever charged. The murders of the Short. The murders of the Short refers to a series of brutal killings that took place in a small town in the United States in the 90s. The victims, all of whom were members of the local Short family, were found murdered in their home with signs of violent struggle in the presence of several unknown DNA samples. The case drew significant attention due to the fact that the family had no known enemies and there were just no clear motive behind the killing. And despite a lengthy investigation, numerous suspects were ruled out, and the case went cold. And the murders of the Short family remain one of the most unsettling and unsolved mysteries in the area. Ivan the Terrible. Ivan the Terrible refers to an infamous Russian ruler, Ivan VI, who reigned from 1547 to 1584. Known for his brutal and unpredictable nature, Ivan became one of the most feared figures in Russian history. His early reign was marked by reforms, but after the death of his beloved wife, Anastasia, Ivan became increasingly paranoid and violent. He created the Oprichnina, which was a secret police force which was responsible for mass executions, including the brutal slaughter of thousands of nobles and perceived enemies. Ivan's reign ended with his sudden death in 1584, leaving behind a legacy of terror. But I just don't know why this one is an unsolved mystery either, so if there's anything I'm missing, comment it down below. Flight 901. Flight 901 refers to the tragic crash of Air New Zealand Flight 901 on November 28, 1979. The DC-10 aircraft was en route from Auckland to Antarctica for a sightseeing tour, carrying 257 passengers and crew. While attempting to fly over Mount Erebus, the plane collided with the mountain, killing everyone on board. The crash was later attributed to a combination of navigational errors, poor weather conditions, and a miscommunication between the pilots and air traffic control. What made the incident even more mysterious was the fact that the aircraft was not initially equipped with the proper warning system to detect its proximity to the mountain. The disaster remains one of New Zealand's most devastating tragedies and is often cited as a cautionary tale about the importance of clear communication and flight safety protocols. Circleville Rider. The Circleville Rider refers to an anonymous person who sent a series of threatening letters to residents of Circleville, Ohio in the 70s and 80s. The letters targeted various individuals, accusing them of personal misdeeds, infidelity, and corruption, and often contained detailed, seemingly intimate knowledge of their lives. The letters were signed with the name the Circleville Rider, and the Rider seemed to have a deep vendetta against certain people in the town. One of the most notorious aspects of the case was the involvement of Mary Gillespie, a schoolteacher who received threatening letters about her alleged affair with the local school superintendent. And the case took a strange turn when Gillespie's husband, Ron, was convicted for the murder of a man allegedly involved in the letter-writing campaign. However, he maintained his innocence, and some believed he was wrongfully convicted, with the true identity of the writer still a mystery. Acid attacks from Hong Kong. The acid attacks from Hong Kong refers to a series of violent incidents in the 90s where individuals in Hong Kong were targeted in acid attacks. The victims, often women, were disfigured after being splashed with corrosive substances, typically sulfuric acid. The attacks were believed to be motivated by personal vendettas, jealousy, or disputes, and many of the victims suffered long-term physical and psychological effects. Though a few arrests were made in relation to some of the attacks, the true motive behind many of these acid assaults remain unclear, and the attacks sparked a public outcry and led to tighter laws surrounding the sale and use of dangerous chemicals in Hong Kong. Alright, let's get into Tier 9. Frankfurt Sewer Body. In 1993, workers cleaning Frankfurt, Germany's sewer system stumbled upon a horrifying discovery: a human body hidden in the filth of the underground tunnels. The body, badly decomposed and stripped of any identification, presented a puzzle for investigators. Due to the state of decomposition, determining the exact time of death was very challenging, but it was clear the person had been in the sewer for a long time. Initial examinations suggested murder, as injuries on the body hinted at violence. However, no missing persons report matched the individual, and investigators were left without any sort of lead. And the sewer's vastness and the flow of water further complicated evidence collection, so they didn't know where it even came from, or if it was put there, or anything in between, so it was just really hard to track it. and to this day, the identity of the victim and the circumstances of their death remain unknown, adding to the eerie lore of Frankfurt's underground. Mary Morris deaths. The Mary Morris deaths remain one of Houston's most chilling mysteries. In October 2000, two women named Mary Morris were murdered just days apart under suspiciously similar circumstances. On October 12th, 48-year-old Mary Lou Morris was found burned in her car near a remote area, though there are no apparent signs of robbery, and leading some to suspect a personal motive or even a mistaken identity. But 3 days later, 39-year-old Mary McGinnis Morris was also found dead in her car, shot in the head. Before her death, Mary McGinnis expressed fear for her safety, claiming someone was threatening her at her work. Her husband's odd behavior after her murder, such as refusing a polygraph test, raised suspicions, but no charges were ever filed. Theories include a botched hit or eerie coincidence, leaving the truth unresolved. Chicago Strangler. The Chicago Strangler refers to the suspected serial killer or killers believed to be behind the unsolved murders of over 50 women in Chicago since 2001. Many of the victims were found strangled and dumped in alleys, vacant lots, or abandoned buildings, primarily on the city's south and west sides. Most were women of color, often living in vulnerable circumstances, such as homelessness or addiction. Investigators initially treated the cases as isolated incidents, but activists and journalists began noticing patterns. In 2019, a study by the Murder Accountability Project highlighted the clustering of these deaths, suggesting the possibility of one or more serial killers operating undetected. But despite growing public concern and calls for a thorough investigation, the cases remain largely unsolved. Melissa Highsmith. Melissa Highsmith's disappearance is one of Texas's most haunting unsolved cases. In 1971, 21-month-old Melissa vanished from her Fort Worth home. Her mother, Adla Apentecino, had placed a babysitting ad, and a woman responded claiming to be experienced. And on August 23rd, the woman picked up Melissa from their apartment while Alta was at work, but she never returned. The case gained national attention, but the few leads police received led nowhere. Decades passed without significant breakthroughs, despite the family's relentless search in the distribution of age-progressed photos. Many speculated Melissa was abducted by someone who raised her as their own. And in 2022, through DNA testing, Melissa was shockingly reunited with her biological family after over 50 years, having lived her life under a different name, and the identity of her abductor remains unknown. I know that one isn't unknown, but it was so insane that they got reunited 50 years later. I just had to add it. The Rogers family. The Rogers family murders in 1989 remain one of Florida's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Hal Rogers, a farmer from Ohio, stayed behind to work with his wife, Joan, and their teenage daughters, Michelle and Christy, went on a vacation to Tampa. Tragically, their trip ended in horror. On June 4th, the family was reported missing after they failed to return home. Days later, their bodies were discovered floating in Tampa Bay. They were bound, gagged, and had been thrown into the water alive, weighed down by concrete blocks. Investigators believe the killer lured them under the guise of helping with directions, but despite extensive efforts, the case went cold for years, and it's just really, really disturbing. Wayne Fitzgerald State Park Jane Doe. The Wayne Fitzgerald State Park Jane Doe is a heartbreaking unsolved case from southern Illinois. In January 1993, hunters discovered the decomposed body of a young woman in a remote area of the park near Rend Lake. She was estimated to be about 20 or 30 years old, with a slight build and reddish-brown hair. Her remains suggested she had died several months earlier, likely in the summer of fall of 1992. No clothing, no personal items, or clear identifiers were found near her body, complicating the investigation. Authorities suspected foul play due to the secluded location and the lack of any reported missing persons matching her description. Despite efforts to identify her through forensic reconstruction and DNA analysis, her identity and the circumstances of her specific death remains a chilling mystery. Kremers and Froon final photo. The final photo in the haunting case of Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon adds a chilling layer to their mysterious disappearance. The The two Dutch students vanished in April 2014 while hiking the Pianista Trail in Panama. Weeks later, their remains were partially discovered along the Lassans camera in Chris's backpack. Among the recovered photos were eerie nighttime images taken days after their disappearance. One shows Chris's hair illuminated by a flash, suggesting she was either injured or deceased by this time. Other photos depict the dense jungle, stones marked with plastic bags, and a makeshift trail marker, seemingly desperate attempts to signal for help in pitch darkness. The exact meaning of these photos remains debated. Were they attempts to navigate or cries for help? And the truth of their fates in the final photo's significance remains elusive. Anthrax 2001 attacks. The Anthrax 2001 attacks were a series of bioterrorism incidents that shook the United States in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks. Letters containing anthrax spores were mailed to several media outlets and U.S. government officials, resulting in 5 deaths and 17 infections. The anthrax was in powdered form, making it easy to disperse and deadly when inhaled or ingested. The FBI launched an extensive investigation, suspecting a domestic source of the attack. Several suspects were considered, including Bruce Ives, a microbiologist who worked at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, and Ives died by S-word in 2008 before formal charges could be brought, so he's a likely suspect, but since he died, there's no way to directly connect him to the attacks, and there's no way to charge him, and the true identity of the perpetrator or perpetrators remains unclear, leaving the 2001 anthrax attacks as one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries in U.S. history. Roanoke. The disappearance of the Roanoke colony in 1587 is one of America's oldest and most puzzling unsolved mysteries. The colony, established on Roanoke Island, which is modern-day North Carolina, was an attempt by England to create a permanent settlement in the New World. Led by John White, the settlers faced numerous challenges, including a lack of resources and tensions with indigenous peoples. And in 1587, White returned to England for supplies, but when he came back in 1590, he found the settlement abandoned with no signs of struggle or battle. The only clue was the word Croatoan, carved into a post, and CRO etched into a tree. The fate of the settlers has since been the subject of speculations. Theories abound, including the possibility of assimilation with local Native American tribes, but no definitive evidence has emerged, and the mystery of what happened to the lost colony remains unsolved, leaving behind a haunting chapter in very early American history. Phantom Sniper. The Phantom Sniper is an unsolved mystery centered around a series of sniper attacks that occurred in the late 1990s. In several incidents across various states in the U.S., individuals were shot from long distances by an unknown assailant, who seemed to vanish without a trace. Victims were often targeted in isolated areas, and the shooter displayed remarkable accuracy, leading to speculations that the sniper had military or professional training. Despite numerous reports and a wide-reaching investigation, the identity of the Phantom Sniper remained elusive. Some believe the attacks were linked to a larger, more sinister pattern, but others argue that they were just random, and the case was never solved. The man that was killed at 9/11/2011 at midnight. The man that was killed at 9/11/2011 at midnight is an obscure unsolved mystery surrounding a strange incident on the anniversary of the September 11th attacks. On September 11th, 2011, shortly after midnight, an unidentified man was found dead in New York City under mysterious circumstances. The unusual timing and the man's unknown identity raised speculation that his death was somehow connected to the 10th anniversary of 9/11. Eyewitnesses reported seeing a figure that resembled the man near Ground Zero shortly before his death, but no clear evidence was found linking his death to the events of that day. And the cause of his death remains unclear, and despite investigations, the man's identity and the circumstances around his demise have never been solved. Tier 10, and the final tier of this iceberg. And if you're watching the video and you enjoy it, 2 hours in, 2 hours and like a half in, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It means the world. But anyways, let's get into the last tier of this iceberg, the Monon Tunnel's bodies. The Mon Tunnels bodies referred to a chilling unsolved mystery involving human remains discovered in abandoned railroad tunnels near Mon, Indiana in the 70s. Over a period of several years, authorities were alerted to multiple skeletal remains found in the area, leading to the suspicion that the tunnels might have been used for sinister purposes. The remains were often hidden deep within the tunnels, with some showing signs of foul play or being dumped post-mortem. Investigators initially theorized that the bodies might be victims of serial killers or organized crime, but despite numerous attempts to identify the victims and uncover the perpetrators, no substantial breakthroughs were made, and the case remains unsolved. And the eerie connection between the bodies and the tunnels continues to intrigue those researching the criminal history of the region. Patterson-Gimlin Massacre. The Patterson-Gimlin Massacre is a term sometimes used in speculative or conspiracy theory surrounding the famous 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film, which allegedly captured footage of a Bigfoot creature in a Bluff Creek, California. Some theorists claim that after the film was taken, a series of unexplained events, including the deaths of individuals associated with the footage, occurred, leading to a so-called massacre. These theories suggest that people connected to the film or Bigfoot research were somehow silenced or killed to cover up the truth about the creature's existence. However, there's really no evidence of any massacre, and the term is largely based on myth and conjecture. The Patterson-Gimlin film itself remains one of the most famous pieces of Bigfoot evidence, but the association claims of violence are widely unsubstantiated and part of the lore surrounding the Bigfoot phenomenon. The 3 killed by aliens in Lake Baikal. The case of the 3 people killed by aliens in Lake Baikal is an unsolved mystery that stems from various conspiracy theories and urban legends surrounding strange deaths in the region. Lake Baikal, located in Siberia, Russia, is known for its mysterious and eerie atmosphere, leading to numerous paranormal claims. One of its most famous and chilling stories is about 3 individuals who, in the 1990s, allegedly died under mysterious circumstances while exploring the lake. According to some reports, their deaths were linked to encounters with extraterrestrial beings or unidentified flying objects, suggesting they were killed by aliens. However, the actual cause of their death was never confirmed, and the theory remains speculative, so who knows? Maybe they were killed by aliens. Phantom social workers. These phantom social workers refers to a mysterious series of events where individuals posing as social workers have been accused of abducting children or causing harm under the guise of official authority. This phenomenon has appeared in various unsolved cases where people pretending to be social workers visited homes, often using forged identification to remove children or engage in suspicious activities, which is crazy scary. These phantom social workers typically targeted vulnerable families, and the victims were left in fear and confusion after realizing that the supposed professionals had no legitimate affiliations. And in some cases, the perpetrators were believed to be part of criminal organizations, while in others, the motivations remain unclear. And despite several investigations, many of these cases remain unsolved. 1990 bombed apartments. The 1990 bombed apartments refers to a series of bombings that occurred in 1990, which targeted various government and public department offices in the United States. These bombings were shrouded in mystery with no clear motive or suspects initially identified. The attacks seemed to be aimed at causing disruption and fear, as the bombs were planted in locations associated with various federal and state departments. Investigators initially suspected a political or radical group was responsible, but no group ever claimed responsibility. And some theories pointed to domestic terrorism or individual acts of revenge, but despite numerous investigations, the perpetrators were never caught. The 1990 bombings remain an unsolved case, leaving many questions unanswered about the true motivations behind the attacks and the identity of those responsible. Ruth Price Call. The Ruth Price Call refers to the mysterious case surrounding Ruth Price, a woman from Indiana whose distressing phone call in 1984 has never been fully explained. In the call, Ruth contacted her sister, pleading for help while in the midst of a terrifying ordeal. She claimed someone was attempting to break into her home, and her fear was palpable. However, when authorities arrived at her home, they found no evidence of a break-in, and Ruth was never seen again. Despite extensive investigations, the circumstances around her disappearance remains unclear. The strange phone call, coupled with the lack of evidence, has kept this case in the realm of unsolved mysteries. And alright, that wraps up the ultimate unsolved crime iceberg explained. with the ultimate true crime iceberg explained. And my brain is cooked from reading and going over so many of these unsolved entries. Like, there was hundreds of them in here. And I really hope you enjoyed this video, because this was just so much researching, so much recording, and so much of all that. And thank you for watching to the end. If you did, this is almost 3 hours in, so crazy dedication to finishing this video through. And if you did, comment Snook Society. If you made it all the way to the end, comment Snook Society. That'd be pretty cool. And thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. It means the world, and I can't believe you did watch to the end. This is a long ass video. But anyways, like and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. And I'm just yapping at this point. So, all right. Anyways, without further ado, see you next time.